KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother, Dagan Moriarty. Dagan, how are you today, my friend?
Happy New Year.
Get it out of your system now. We were talking about this on Sacred Symbols. And we're almost running out of runway here with saying Happy New Year. So get it out of your systems.
I know. Do you feel like that? I told you the classic story of me saying Happy New Year's to a neighbor in March.
That's egregious.
It was. He even looked at me like, what? And like, I think his reaction was to start laughing. He never even said it back. It was embarrassing, but it was a learning moment for me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you get the embarrassment, and then you get the dose of shame, and then you never do it again.
Now, if you hear any vacuuming in the background of Dagan's of the audio, it's Dagan's house. That his cleaners are cleaning his house right now. Timing
right outside my door, like the worst possible worst possible location. And we shouldn't last long.
We've been talking for I don't know. It just shut off, I think.
Yeah, but don't get excited.
Because I was going to say, we came on 10 or 15 minutes ago and they were vacuuming even then. So these people are very thorough. I mean, you live in a big house, but...
It's not that big.
That's what I was going to say. It's not that. I mean, it sounds like they've just been vacuuming all day. Now, should we have them on the show?
Well, they don't speak lovely women, but they don't speak very good English, as I told you. So I don't know how well that would go over. Now, every cleaning service we've used does the same thing. You were just saying that, they're doing a quality job and they're good, but every visit, let's say it's every 2 or 3 weeks, whatever it is, gets a little less, right? They get a little too, and you would think, they know the house, they know the ebbs and flows. They kind of know the flow, right? But it's just that they do a little less of a good job every single time.
Yeah, that's no good. That's no good.
They need to kind of swing that around and just a little consistency. If they feel like it's going a little downhill, then spring back on the 4th week and go back to like the 1st week, and then you could kind of slip, as long as there's some sort of rhythm, but not just a downward,
a precipitous decline,
continuous downward slope in qualities.
Yeah, that's no good. That's no bueno. I'd like to get here's the thing. I hired a few people to clean in California, and maybe it's just my dad energy, and I mean our dad energy, but no one cleans better than me. Like, I'm only satisfied when I clean.
Yeah.
Anyone else who cleans, it's just like, I might not say anything, but I'm not crazy about the job you did, Yeah. And because I'm universal. In there, dude, I'm getting naked in the shower, like, bleaching in the shower, I clean the shower when I take a shower. I mean, that's the way you got to do it. That's the way you got to do it.
Yeah, so you'll never get a mildew problem. Never going to get.
I'm scrubbing. But Micah cleans the house now, and she does a really nice job. But I've suggested several times, like, let's just get some people in here every month or so,
sure,
and kind of just straighten up. That way, we can start from a more pristine place. But I think this offends her in some way. Like, I've brought it up multiple times, and I don't know. Like, we don't act on it. And I'm like, I don't mean to be insulting you. I'm saying that neither of us want. I'm certainly not doing it. And neither of us want to do it anymore, or want to, like, let's hire some people.
I get that.
But yeah, so it's an ongoing thing, but nonetheless, I did promise everyone, since we're doing Constellation now, our new podcast. And by the way, go subscribe to Constellation. It's our new conversational podcast co-hosted by Dagan and I. You can find it on podcast services. You can find it on YouTube. And of course on Patreon, where you get it early and ad free. We go every other week with that show. KnockBack will fill in the every other week in those slots, and we'll go back and forth between them. I want to ask you real quick before we get into the topics, because we're going to get into the topics quicker on KnockBack. How do you feel about the new show and the success of the new show? I have to say the show is doing extraordinarily well, and I am disappointed with how little I've heard from you about how extraordinarily well it is, because you are getting critical acclaim. And I don't know if you're not seeing it or you're just kind of ignoring it. You're trying to be a little blasé.
No, I definitely listen. It's awesome. It's a shot in the arm. Gives me a nice positive energy when things are kind of in a lull career wise for the moment. It won't last forever, but it hasn't been the greatest. I've also been procrastinating a huge amount, but we won't go into that. But no, I definitely see the feedback on, my DMs, social media DMs, and then I see the YouTube comments. There's one show up already for you guys to watch. I had a blast recording it with you and Dustin and Chris.
Me too.
And it was a lot of fun. I think it's going to be great. I love the formula. I love the conversational, off the cuff nature. I think it's going to be a blast. But no, I'm super into the fact that it's doing well. I have that sort of outlook though, of like a little bit of pessimistic, like, well, I guess the first thing always draws. The first thing of anything draws a lot of excitement. That's when people come on and they're finding it. They feel like, they kind of plant the flag in it, like they've been there from day one. So there's that kind of energy. And will it sustain that momentum or, God forbid, grow? That's an exciting prospect. But no, I'm super psyched on it. I think, I love talking to you guys. I love talking nerdy shit. And it's just so this is completely in my wheelhouse. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think I am really looking forward to it week in and week out. And I'm glad people are digging it so far. I mean, that's very satisfying that people are digging it right from and universally, we have a very polite audience in general, but I haven't heard a negative thing.
No,
now, people that feel negatively may just not, they might not offer feedback.
That's no.
That's not how it works.
That's not how the internet works. That's like the golden rule of the internet is people usually only bother to say anything when they're upset about something, which is why you can't take that feedback too seriously.
Sure.
So the fact that you're getting overwhelming positivity, I think, is a great sign. And that we are. So yeah, I want to just ask everyone a favor, because I know we have thousands of KnockBack fans out there that listen to the show. Go subscribe to Constellation, leave it a nice review on podcast services. Of course, support us on Patreon if you don't already, or watch us on YouTube if you'd like. They're all going to be on video. And to just frame it for you guys, it's a conversational podcast where each of us bring a topic to the podcast that we want to discuss. It can be anything you want. They can be and usually will be non sequiturs. So the first episode was about Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, New Year's resolutions, about discovering new talents and abilities, and my topic, which was NASA's Artemis 1. And so to me, I get excited that people love these topics because this is really nerdy, minutia driven shit. We'll continue to do fun and weird and entertaining and historic and whatever things on there. And we're going to swap out members. So Dagan and I will be on the show with different people every time in our orbit and in our lives as well. I'd like to start getting other people. I think Ramon would be great on the show. I think PJ would be great on the show.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely start doing that as well. But I think the next episode is going to be Defining Duke. If we can get I would like to get both of them, but if we can get at least one of them, that would be great. And then we'll get Mike on the show at some point, and we'll get Ben on the show and others. So it's going to be great. I'm really excited about it. Thank you all out there for loving it and supporting it, and for loving me specifically.
It's all about you, dude. And listen, a lot of that opening conversational KnockBack energy is being put into Constellation. So you're not really losing it. It's just getting shifted over.
Right. And fair enough. We do take a long time to get into the topics on the show. And I think it hurts the show, although I really enjoy that. So we're going to have the best of both worlds now. Get new audiences this way. And we'll begin. I'm actually going to write this down. We'll begin time stamping when we're going to start talking about these topics as well, so people can find them quickly and get right to the topic at hand, because we love KnockBack. We are dedicated to KnockBack, and it ain't going nowhere. Now, Dig, on this topic today, we've decided, and you have an extensive list that you've been, you send every so often, some additions, some subtractions, about all the things we could do. And some of them are, minutia driven. Some of them are about our lives. Some of them are about movies, games, whatever. And I'd like to continue to have an admixture of all these different things, specifically because people like these kinds of topics specifically. So I thought we would come back, because remember, we didn't record it all in December. KnockBack went away for the first time since we began it. Yep. And so we're coming back with what I think people will really enjoy, which is the fashion of our youth. Now, I want to say something very specifically. Episode 84 of this show is about 80s fashion. That was a specific topic about what we thought about the fashion of the 80s. And I think Dagan talks a little bit about some of the clothes he used to wear in there. But that's not this topic, because we have done redundant topics on accident before. So I always try, now paranoid, go in and make sure that we haven't talked about this before. I'm pretty sure we've never done this topic. But nonetheless, this is going to be about how we dressed ourselves, or how our parents dressed us as well, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we hope you enjoy it. Now, Dig, where did this topic come from? You always have a good feel for these sorts of life-driven topics. And I often fear doing them because when you do one, it's gone forever. There's no movie to come replace it or video game to come replace it. I just feel like there's only so many things to do.
Sure.
And so I do love this topic. And I'm wondering what comes to mind for you for it and why you wanted to talk about it here on KnockBack.
Yeah, this is on the list of, our more personal reflection memory topics of mine for a while, because I think I just have such a visual nature. I just have such a focus on aesthetic and, couple that with the nostalgia that we're obsessed with. It's just like such a big part of the way our childhoods looked was what we were wearing, what people were wearing, and the different trends and the different fads and the different phases we went through at different eras. So fashion and style and clothing and cliques and everything like that we kind of moved in and out of as we grew up is such a big part of the memories, right? Like, what were we wearing when that happened, when this happened, when we were friends with that person?
Who were you wearing?
Transpired. Who were you wearing? So, this should be a fun one. And I have to say, just reflecting on this topic and writing for it last night and this morning, a lot of fun reflections, some definite what was I thinking moments, which kind of play into the conversation in a humorous way, I hope. And yeah, it should just be a fun conversation. And I think this is one of those ones where it'll be especially fun for you and I to ping pong back and forth. Because, we grew up 10, almost 11 years apart, and we definitely have different stylistic iterations at different eras. And I was even, born longer. So mine goes back, filters back even to the 70s.
Indeed.
And then by the time I stopped caring what I was looking at, you were just coming into that, what I was looking like, and stopped, responding to the peer pressure and stuff. You were just coming into that. So I was kind of passing the baton in a way. So it should be a fun conversation to go back and forth on.
Indeed. I have a bunch of notes written down too, because this is relatively easy to kind of, I found it relatively easy to generate a bunch of things that I wanted to talk about or that came to mind. Because when you think about it, you're always clothed, or you're usually clothed. So, and there are these ebbs and flows in your own fashion sense. And I don't even want to talk about us as adults. And I will say, as an adult, I don't think I've changed much at all. I used to wear a bunch of, I've gone back to my whole graphic tee thing, and we're going to talk a great deal about graphic tees as I've gotten my 30s. Like when I've stopped going. So just to briefly touch on my 20s and 30s, I guess, when I was working in a corporate office at IGN, first of all, I was poor when I first started working there. So I wear my jeans and a t-shirt, but then slowly I'd start wearing polos and button downs. And you can see that evolution in the videos on IGN, that there comes a point where the last 2 or 3 years I worked there, you'll never catch me in a graphic tee. I start dressing like a tech bro. And then when we found it kind of funny and I stopped going into an office, I'm like, well, there's no reason for me to wear I'm going to wear a button down at home and so I just started going back to t-shirts, and then it completely has decayed to the point where I don't even get dressed anymore. Like I basically, here's what happens. This is the whole cycle. Let's say it starts at my shower. Okay. I shower in the late afternoon or early evening before dinner every night. Okay. Because I'm working out into that. I usually work out into the shower. I get out of the shower. I put on a new t-shirt, new pair of underwear, and sweatpants. I have like 5,000 pairs of Mack Weldon sweatpants, the most comfortable sweatpants in the world. Love them.
Jealous.
And they are and have been a sponsor of the show. I really do love them. Like the Mack Weldon sweatpants are just the absolute fucking best.
They're so nice.
And I live in them. Dad was here and we went to dinner after Christmas. And I'm like, I think the last time I wore jeans was the last time you were here and we went to dinner. Like, seriously, I went into my room and picked up a pair of jeans with a belt already in the loop, like that was sitting on a chair. And I'm like, all right, time to put these on, I guess. And it's like
pants.
Yeah, exactly. And so I put them on, and then I get home and I take them off immediately. And so starting at that shower, late afternoon, early evening, I put on my shirt, I put on a pair of sweatpants. I wear my sweatpants for a few days each. And I wear a new pair of underwear, obviously. And I have, we eat dinner or whatever. I hang out, I go to bed. Now, everyone knows I sleep without underwear on. I sleep only in my t-shirt. This is well established in Last Stand Media lore. I take off my sweatpants, I take off my underwear, and I sleep in a t-shirt.
Winnie the Pooh style, baby.
Exactly. And so I'm wearing the same t-shirt, right, that I slept in. Then I get up in the morning, I brush my teeth, just take care of stuff, but I just wear the same clothes. This is the t-shirt that I put on after I showered last night, ate dinner in it, went to bed in it. Now I'm wearing it here.
Oh, so that's how you do. Okay.
After this is over, I'm going to work out in this shirt, in this underwear, then go throw those in the laundry, take a shower, then bring in a new t-shirt, new underwear, et cetera, and so on. So my cycle, right. So I have a little bit of a rhythm.
Yeah.
But it's completely eliminated all other clothing options. And in fact, I wear the same 7 or 8 t-shirts over and over again because they just kept getting, laundered and then put on the top of the pile. And so I'm too lazy to even dig. Dude, I have hundreds of t-shirts that would fit me. So that's the system now. But I've settled into that.
Okay.
And that's just, I don't think I could do it forever. If I was in the fucking U.S. House of Representatives, I don't think I could dress like this.
Probably not.
So I just wanted to establish that that's where I'm at now.
Okay.
T-shirts, sweatshirts, flip-flops, hardcore flip-flops always. My neighbors all make fun of me here. A few of them do because I'm wearing flip-flops all the time. Like
flip-flops in wintertime.
Yeah, just
Doesn't
straight up.
matter.
When I'm walking the dog, I don't get cold for some reason.
Okay.
And I really picked that up in California, especially in LA. Like flip-flops are life there. I never wore shoes
true.
unless you were going out to eat or something like that.
Sure.
So that's where I'm at now. And of course, what is my iconic fashion statement since I started my career? The Adidas shell toe. I've probably worn 50 pairs of those at this point. I mean, no joke. Classic. I buy literally 4 or 5 of them at a time. In fact, when I worked at IGN, a person from Adidas got in touch with me that worked there and was like, we are obviously a huge fan of your shoes. So you're a huge fan of our shoes and we like your show. So here's a 50% off coupon. And I went and bought like 10 pairs of shell toe.
Oh, shit. Adidas had you on flow. Like, not a full sponsorship, but kind of like, let's try this. Now, your feet were on camera?
Well, yeah. When we would do, let's not get perverted with it. But when we were, of course, we would have the wide shots of
I remember
podcasts and we were sitting on couches and so, all the time.
That's true.
Yeah. So
long
that's
shots. Definitely.
And when we did Game Over Greggy's show and all that, those were all long shots as well. So yeah, people just knew me for that, which is funny. And I do still to this day, since I was 21, 22, buy the same pair of shoes every time I go to online now. Adidas shell toes, all stars. So Dig, since you've been around longer and we've established now my fashion sense in modernity, which isn't very strong. I was wondering if you wanted to kind of begin. I wonder, one of the first things I thought of when I was a kid, because we're not dressing ourselves, but I was wondering, the first thing I wrote on my list was play clothes. How much play clothes annoyed the fuck out of me. I hated them. I didn't understand it. I found it obnoxious. I felt like my style was good during the day. I come home from nursery school and mom's taking me out of my duds and putting me in making me look like a homeless man so I can go outside and play.
That is so interesting. You really thought that at such a young age?
Yeah. Oh, that I hated it. Yeah, definitely. I was just,
wow.
I was just like, why? I'm feeling good. I'm looking good. I had a good day.
Little dapper dude.
Right. And I'm like, what am I really doing out here? In thinking back, I'm sure it was a wise decision, but I don't think I was even that wild of a kid. It was like, what was I doing? Going and sitting Indian style playing Nintendo at my friend's house? I mean, what was really happening that you felt like you needed to put me in, like I was going to the fucking Battle of the Bulge or something like that?
Play clothes.
Right, exactly. So that's where my mind went when I was a kid, but I wonder where your mind went when you were thinking about your childhood.
That is so funny, dude. I love that you're starting it there. And my journey as a little kid was probably kind of the opposite. Like my sentiment was kind of the flip-flop of what you just said. And I love you starting with arriving at what your fashion is now, because this whole conversation that we're about to have is how we arrived at kind of what we dig now, our style, what we respond to stylistically and clothing wise. So this is kind of our journey to get to where we are now, good or bad. And it's, for me, I don't know how good it is, but
you're good.
Yeah, I love starting at little kid because my kind of stylistic or fashion autonomy didn't really start, and we'll talk about this next, until probably 6th grade. So now we're in the era of being a little kid and basically the time period of being dressed by mom and dad and really having little to no say over what you wear. So it's an interesting era. And of course, mine delves back into the 70s. And you guys have to understand, I love going back to the 70s because I see it like a Sofia Coppola movie, the lens flare, the sun drenched scene, morning, wood paneling, everything's brown and green. Like my 70s aesthetic is so lock and step to like it almost feels like the 70s was still yesterday. Like I love the warmth of my 70s memories, but it feels so ethereal and dreamlike, and I love delving back into this era. But it is kind of funny because the fashions were really funky, but there's a tenderness to thinking back this far because this is before we got a little older, prior to being influenced, for instance, by the music we listened to, or the peer pressure, or the influence of our friends, or that cool dude in school that you admire, or the image we want to portray. Starting to have a voice stylistically. As a little kid, it's so innocent because it's before that desire to align with a certain look based on what clique you fancy being a part of or whatever. This is before that. And I realized as I was writing this morning that as little kids, it really just came down to, at least for me, for comfort, pure and simple. Like the closest it felt like to actually being naked, the better, like the happier we were. So I do remember that as a kid. And I think part of my journey with that is growing up in the 70s, because you guys have to remember, a lot of you guys are younger and gals, and you don't remember. So, but the 70s was kind of a time of like turtleneck wool sweaters and starchy, sturdy jeans that were just really uncomfortable, and knee patches on your pants. And sometimes the knee patches were inside, which is like, I remember being a little kid and being like, why is everything so uncomfortable? Or like the button down shirt that was buttoned up to your throat.
You use the right word. You use the right word with starch. Yeah, starch. That's the way I wasn't around that time. But that's the way I see what you're saying. Like the very sharp collars on the shirts.
The big butterfly collars that can like put your eye out.
Right, exactly. That's a perfect way of putting it. And the patching is so interesting too, because you're right. You could put the pants inside out, put the patch in there, and then have the outline of the hole or whatever is being patched if you wanted. Or you can put it on the outside and have like the square or the rectangle or whatever.
It's so crazy. And 70s patches were like part of the fashion. I think if you were an older kid, I actually researched a little online to kind of refresh my memory of what the brand names were. Like when I was a preschool kid or just entering into grade school, kindergarten, and what the high school kids were wearing, I do remember seeing what they were wearing, like Jordache and Sassoon. Calvin Klein might have started to be getting into the conversation at that point. But, you think of that 70s show or the Brady Bunch, like it really did look like that. It was the rust colored oranges and the greens and the browns and the flare leg jeans and frill and patches. And it really does evoke that 70s show sensibility. But as a kid, I do remember like everything felt, especially God forbid you had to go to church or some special occasion and you had to get quote unquote dressed up. Then you were wearing like the tight corduroys. Everything just seemed hot and suppressing and itchy. So for us, it was all about the weekends or coming home from school and getting into those play clothes. And it was about the t-shirt, whether it didn't even matter what the graphic was, as long as it was something cool, right? There was a motorcycle on there, some kind of saying. Maybe you were lucky enough to have like a Dukes of Hazzard shirt, but it didn't matter as long as it was comfy. And then picture the shorts, the 1970s shorts, the cotton shorts with the piping. So maybe you had like the red shorts with that white piping, that white outlining on it. And then, of course, the telltale 70s staple for the kid was the white knee socks with the stripes, right? And then hopefully just comfy sneakers of some sort. God forbid you had to wear like, back then, dude, like dress shoes to go to church or go to grandma's or whatever. They were just like blocky. You had to cram your foot in with like a shoehorn.
I remember going to the store to buy nice shoes several times, with mom.
Not good, dude.
No, I don't know what, like there was no interest in children being comfortable.
No.
It's
In fact, I
It's
don't
funny.
know. That might have started in the 80s. I don't even know how bad they had it in the 60s and 50s. If it was worse and was getting progressively better into the 70s, I can't even imagine how
You know,
bad it must have been the decades prior, right?
you know what I was imagining when you were talking and you were talking about like you getting dressed and going to these things is and being so uncomfortable. I don't know why I thought of this. Is like thinking of teenagers in the Middle Ages or something, like well-to-do teenagers, where it's like they got to put on armor to go to like, you know, some. It's like and all this shit's like, are you kidding me? You know, I got to wear these fucking. I look like I have my Squire outfit on and that pilot helmet thing on, and then I'm putting
Can
all
you
this shit on.
imagine, dude? Like foppish, but then all the gear on top. It's like it's the exaggeration of getting bundled up in the 70s into the early 80s in your winter gear to go outside. That was a nightmare because that was the other thing besides being hot and being sweaty and being uncomfortable was being encumbered. Like as a kid, you don't want your movement or your freedom to be limited. But that is such a large part of just maybe even where my claustrophobia comes from, of like being wrapped in things you didn't want to be wearing, you know? So it's the kind of the opposite thing too. It was like, I couldn't wait to get home from first grade and get off the corduroy and get off the button fly collar and the itch. The wool sweater was the worst. Sometimes without a t-shirt underneath, like the wool's actually making contact with your skin.
Yeah.
That's just mean.
Yeah.
That's just mean spirited. You know what I mean? Like you don't understand what wool feels like. Like what was wrong with the parents?
They didn't
back
want.
then?
Yeah, they just didn't want to waste another pair of another item of laundry that could be done later.
It could have been that. Oh, Kiki's with us today, by the way.
Kiki,
No barking.
my friend.
The vacuum's starting up again, but
Oh,
I think it's more distant. Hopefully,
it's more distant now. They don't see you. They don't. Now, I wanted to say this. I don't know. Do you feel this way? I wonder. I think about the 70s. Let's go all the way back to the 50s. World War II, 40s destroys the 40s. We get into the 50s. Americana, big cars, suburbia, all of that. The 60s,
Sure.
You get flower power and the counter revolution and all these kinds of things and so on and so forth. And then you get the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and they all have these identities. Right. Is it just me, or do we seem to have some sort of general consensus about the 1970s that we're like, never again? You know, we love X, Y, and Z about the 50s, the Mad Men style and the cocktails and the nuclear family. We love that shit. The 60s, we love the music and we love the fashion and hate Ashbury and all the, you know, the peace and and then it's like, and in the 80s, we love like the computers and the video games and the fashion and all and the music and everything. But there just seems to be something about the 70s where we're like, you know, there's a few things here we like, some of the music, some of the color palettes, all that. But I feel like it's never really emerged, in my opinion, as this go-to nostalgic thing. I'm wondering if it's because I wasn't there. But you see, like, there has never been a revival. Think about electronic music today, just as an example, or electronic adjacent rock music. It still invokes new wave to this day. And new wave comes a little bit from the 70s, but this 80s style electronic aesthetic. And 311, my favorite band, comes up often, still rap rocks like it's the 90s, right? But I don't feel like anyone's playing disco. You know, I don't feel like people are wearing bell bottoms.
Yeah.
I don't feel like you think about just, I don't know, man, the bright, airy, drug-addled, weird shit that was going on in the 70s. I don't know. I just don't feel like
it's mostly true.
Am I being too hard on it?
No, I think there's a stigma with the 70s, right? And I think a lot of it you could see is more lampooned than embraced, because I think a lot of it was so extreme. Disco, for instance, there is a nostalgia for disco, but not largely. Bell bottoms are so extreme. I think there are some segments of the 70s that are embraced. You mentioned music. Film has certainly, in the last decade or two, film of the 70s has been largely sort of brought into like Criterion status, a lot of film. And, you know, I can think of other things that are smaller, but definitely important, like muscle cars, right? Muscle cars really started in the late 60s, and 70s was the muscle car.
Yeah, so maybe
era.
I'm overstating the point then. You know,
there are certain
more
things, but fashion. And I think Helene was just talking about bell bottoms coming back. In fact, she got bell bottoms for her Halloween costume, but then was telling me that they're sort of making a comeback, but I think there's always something, again, that stigma where it's not going to reach mainstream pop culture circulation just because it's a little bit more kitschy, like, oh, Brady Bunch, again, that 70s show, Dukes of Hazzard, Love Boat, whatever you define with 70s pop culture. It's more like, oh, remember it then, but not necessarily saying it as a good thing, just that it was so different and so markedly specific to that 10-year period. So it is interesting because you're right when you compare it to the bookending decades, 50s, 60s, 80s. All of those decades are remembered with such effusive love. And the 70s is more like, oh, the 70s were funky. You know, what does funky mean? Is that negative or positive? I don't know. It's kind of dubious.
It's funny too, because you brought up, I brought up disco and we discussed it a little bit, is I think disco is awesome. I just think disco needs to stay there. There's no relevance for it today. It's very similar to like big band stuff. I'm sure there are big bands playing, and there was a big band revival in the 90s, but generally speaking, we don't, just because it's great doesn't mean it needs to exist still to this day as something that's still being produced. So it's not necessarily, I guess, an insult to disco as much as it just doesn't. It's frankly the way a lot of people feel about nu metal. I don't feel that way about nu metal, but a lot of people do. It's just like, it's got to stay where in the 90s and in the early 2000s, that's where it belongs. We shouldn't have this kind of shit anymore. So maybe it's also like, if we think about our Aunt Joni, who's very much connected to the 70s and disco and all that era, it's probably very different for her. And so I probably am overstating the point, but it's funny because when I think of all those decades, the 70s is the only decade that when it comes into my mind, all I think about are colors, like you were saying, just orange, palette, yellow, olive green. It's I don't know, brown.
Yeah, browns. It was kind of revisited in the 90s with Earth Colors, right? That was kind of a return to the 70s. And again, we've talked about this on the show, which was kind of an answer to the garish neon colorfulness of the 80s. It was like, we need to step back from that. And then you go back too far in the other direction, you almost overcorrect. I think about this a lot, Kyle, like rehashing eras or decades in whatever it is, fashion, music, film, product design, anything, right? Industrial design, it doesn't matter, architecture, anything. It's like rehashing something old, but how much of that in that rehash, how much of it has to be a new spin, an original take on an inspiration, hearkening back, to whatever era, right? So how much of it needs, you take a little dose of the original thing, and then how much of that recipe needs to be some new flavor to jazz it up or make it something inspired by the past, but something contemporary. So, there's always that too. And how much of that and how little, and is that a matter of taste? I don't know, but it's such an interesting point you made about the 70s, because it really is the only decade that I witnessed, at least that I know of, that really isn't, right? You could go back to the roaring 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the Greatest Generation. Like every decade, again, seems to draw that sunshine, right? That positive energy or that bright reflection, where it's the 70s is like, yeah, and the 70s was a decade too, It's like, and I'm of that era. So, Gen Xers are of, we were born back then.
Yeah.
So we're products of that. I wonder how much that's a conversation on how crazy we are.
There is a deep psychological component to being of the era of when people raised you from the era before, if that makes sense. Like, I think the baby boomer, Gen X, I think that's why I think Generation X is so formative, and why I think that it's disappointing for me to not be part of it, because I feel like I'm part of it, but I'm not. I'm what they call an elder millennial, I guess.
Yeah, you're close.
When I think about,
you're close.
When I think, I almost wish it's not. That's not the way we count generations, but it almost feels like there was a generation between Generation X and the millennials.
Yes,
and
there is really.
And I don't know what exactly. I remember they used to throw around the term Generation Y and all these different things, but to me, what it means is I was a child and a teenager when the internet began to proliferate into all aspects of our lives. So I remember the days before that, and I lived the days after that. And that is a very specific paradigm shift in humanity that most people will have never experienced. And I'm so fascinated by that. Like just that people don't even understand what it was to answer a phone.
No,
it's crazy.
It's
now,
crazy.
I don't ever want to answer the phone ever again. But there was a time in my life when the phone would ring all the time. It didn't give me anxiety, and I would just answer it, and I had no idea who was on the other end.
Can you imagine? Pay phones. I was just thinking about this last night. I don't know what movie was I watching. I forget. The Equalizer, maybe. I don't even know why payphones came up. But because he had like his burner cell phones, and he was dealing with the Russian mob, and he didn't want to get traced. And I'm just thinking like, and that movie's at least 10 years old. I'm just thinking back, even then in 2012 or whenever that came out, it's like payphones were not even a thing. Like he couldn't even go to a payphone. So I mean, yeah, it's your generation is interesting because I always think of most of you guys, at least the people that I'm close to, as closer to Gen X than the millennials. But you guys really are that in between generation of the early to mid 80s, and you really were born on that technological and pop culture sort of razor's edge. You kind of fall both ways. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with your surroundings too. I was remarking to Micah recently that it's funny that I've gone through much of my life without being around people younger than me. Like I was always the youngest person, or, if you're in school, you're amongst the youngest people, or you're hanging out with a person a year younger than you or something incidental like that. But I never experienced life through the lens of someone younger than me. I experienced my entire life through the lenses of people older than me. And I think it's just made me an old soul, as it were, and someone who has a lot more of a tether to like the 80s than my birthright being born in 1984 would suggest, or to the music and to the various stylizations of the era.
Sure.
I think a lot of that has to do with, in other words, with nurture and or a lack thereof. If I have, we have younger cousins, but it's not like we were close to them when we were kids. I have no younger siblings. I have no younger people in the neighborhood. My good friends, my band, when I was in my band in high school, they were older than me. It was a constant older than me situation around.
Yes. And that really kind of flavors your old soulness, I think. What you responded to, what you were around. It was just your exposure. You were the youngest sibling of 4 too.
And I had years hanging out even with your best friend PJ.
Yes.
Where, when I was in high school, I would hang out with PJ and into college. I would hang out with him constantly. PJ's what? I don't know.
He's in between you and he's closer to me. He's 4 years younger than me. Yeah.
Right. So he's like something like 7 or 8 years older than me.
Yes.
And so I'm 16, he's 24. And I would see the, often insane world through his eyes, And I think it also painted me, and I've said this before, and I'm very grateful for it, although it is awkward to think about in hindsight, is like, I'm very grateful that my siblings and their friends all included me and everything to a fault, to a degree, as we've said, but I always felt like I was part of this group. And so I always felt like I was older in some sense. But anyway, that's another conversation.
You were a cool kid. You went with the flow. And I think that a lot of that, it's your intelligence. And I think I don't know, like, that's interesting. Like, probably your sensitivity, like you just understood that, this is the world. You got home from preschool or elementary school and this was your world then. And then there were other worlds. Like, a lot of kids don't have that kind of sophistication. They're just kind of ensconced in that wherever they are, first grade. And you don't have an understanding that there's, as you get older, your friends change, your interests change, but you seem to be aware of those things, even though you weren't there yet age-wise. So again, just having that sensitivity, I think, and that exposure, where all kids wouldn't be like that. Like, some kids would just be acting like little kids in that situation. And then the older kids don't want them around, if that makes sense. I could think of other kids like that, or other friends, siblings that wouldn't have fit into that mold, but you had that.
Yeah. That's why I feel like I appreciate that, because I feel like, although I'm not aware of very much when I'm a child, I don't remember it being a problem with people that I was around. And I feel like you would kind of absorb that, but it is true. I never really did or said anything. I mean, get a little beer in me and it would change.
Yeah, as long as that didn't make you grow up too fast too. Because that could also be tragic for a kid where, if you're just hanging out with kids, like I just think like you're in the finished basement, you're hanging out with kids, you're watching movies or playing games or listening to music that maybe you shouldn't be yet. Maybe it would just speed up. And I'm sure that happens to a lot of kids just by the nature of growing up, both parents working. Now you're stuck with the teenage siblings, that type of thing. But as long as that didn't help you to grow up too fast. But I don't remember ever being inappropriate in front of you. Although by the time, as you said, you were a teenager and you were exposed to us in our 20s, and we were very immature, acting like teenagers still in our 20s. So you were exposed to definitely the mischief angle of that, which is more humorous. But as long as you weren't getting in trouble with the law, or we weren't getting you high or something like that.
No.
Like, I think it's okay.
Who is that guy? Fuck, I can't. He was like a little heavy set, I guess, and he used to hang out with him on Long Island, and we hung out with him a few times when I was in high school.
Okay,
I can't remember. I was just thinking about this random. I can't. His name's on the tip of my tongue.
Skater or no?
Yeah, Skater. Friend of PJ's. Maybe PJ will know. He listens to the show. Maybe he'll let us know. Okay. But there were so many different random characters. They were all quite friendly to me, which I appreciated. And that goes for Dana too. Dana's friends are really nice to me still to this day, and I have like a sisterly relationship with a few of them.
Definitely, sure.
And then Allie's friends, it's funny because the last time I saw Allie's friends, I think a couple of them told Allie that I was hot. And I was like,
I could see that. You come to that age where it's okay now to admit those things.
Well, because I was thinking, when I was around Allie's people a lot too, and they were always friendly to me as well. And I think the reason that I didn't grow up too fast was because there was still a sufficient distance between Allie and I. So it's not like you can imagine being a 9th grader and your sister's an 11th grader and you're hooking up with her friend, or you're like, you're going to parties with them or some weird shit
makes sense.
Makes you grow up too fast. But I was in 6th or 7th grade when Allie graduated high school. No, I was in 8th grade when Allie graduated high school because we just missed each other.
5 years apart.
So that's too far apart, for us to have like, for me to have grown up too fast. And obviously her being the closest in proximity to me means that was never going to happen with Dana or you. So
right. Yep. Absolutely. You're the same difference from Allie as I am from Allie the other way.
Right. Exactly.
Allie's right in the middle.
And so it's I always joke about me being a mistake, and I obviously was, but
I really don't think I think you're the only one that wasn't.
but I'm grateful for that, because I did have this situation where I had siblings, but it was different. It was more of a caretaker role. Probably not fun for my siblings. But
dude, it was amazing. I forget. I don't want to tell this story wrong, but we've definitely touched on this on the podcast in the past, but can you imagine? And now I loved Dana and Allie. It's not like I didn't love my sisters, but there was a period of time where I thought I could have another little sister. That would have been 3 little sisters with me being the only boy. So I do remember being 10 and being like, please be a boy. And the excitement around finding out. I want to say mom and dad. Do you remember this? Did they find out prior to you?
No, I think that they didn't know until I was born.
So it was a surprise.
Yeah.
So I do remember the excitement. I think not just that I had, but that everybody had, that there was another boy and that the family was like symmetrical now and that whole thing. I do remember that, especially my excitement. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing, Yep. And I do maintain that there is a possibility, especially thinking how young, A, and how crazy, B, mom and dad were in the 70s. Especially with me and Dana, that me and Dana might not have been intentional. Like they might not have been purposely trying to avoid having kids, but I'm not sure we were quote unquote planned. Like probably Allie, who we used to make fun of, was, like a mistake or an accident. And you, which mom does say like, no, we were, like we were kind of feeling our druthers. Dad got promoted. Like we wanted to have we always wanted to have more kids. So we had to get to stepping.
Jesus.
Was already
let's not even go any further.
We gotta make hay.
Fucking Christ. No, it's cool too, because I often say, with all the internet says harsh things about me a lot, as they do many people. And there's this charge of how I am misogynistic for some reason. I've never heard, never understood why. And I've always found that strange because I've explained to people and people in my life, no, I come from a very matriarchal family, dominated by women, completely dominated by women in every shape, every way, shape or form. And it goes back to our mother has 2 sisters. Her sisters are twins, and one of them has a daughter, and then one of them has a daughter and a son. And then we have, our family where like there was an imbalance until I was born. And it's just much more centered towards our aunts. It's much more centered towards our grandmother. It's much more centered towards our mom.
Sure.
And so there's a very feminine, and I don't mean this as an insult or as a bad thing. It's a very feminine energy in our and matriarchal energy in our family.
Always.
And I dig it.
Back.
Yeah, I personally think that's awesome. Like that's natural to me, where you defer to the women, kind of,
Yeah, strong women was never an odd thing for us. I mean, our mother grew up in a household with our great grandma and our grandma, and those two, I'm old enough to remember, those two ruled the roost. I mean, they were the heads of the kingdom. That's it, period. I mean, I loved my grandpa. He was awesome. And my great grandfather was great too. He passed away when I was 6, but those 2 women ruled that house and the larger side of our maternal, side of the family. And then, of course, Dad has 4 sisters. 2. Our dad has 4 sisters too. So
it's a great point.
It exists on both sides.
Lots of womanly energy. Maybe that explains why I still have a vision in my mind of going and seeing the Downton Abbey movie, the newest one with Micah, mom, and the girls, Dana, our sister, Dana and Allie. And I was the only, that place was full up. And I was definitely maybe the only straight man in that entire movie theater.
I don't understand that because Downton is so awesome.
No, it totally is. I think
it's so awesome.
I felt people's eyes on me. We got there. I reserved our seats wherever we got there. And then we were there a little early. So I'm like, I'm going to go and get my food. And I think I told you that I was behind. Did I tell you about this? Is when I think I said it on the show. I was in line behind these 3 old ladies buying tickets. Did I say this on this show?
No, I don't remember.
And so no one buys tickets in person anymore. And if you buy tickets, you usually go to like the kiosk in front.
Sure.
You usually use your phone. These 3 old women were going and seeing Downton Abbey, but they didn't have tickets. They went to the concession stand. I happened to be on this line of, the 7 lines that are available. So I picked the fucking wrong line always.
Always.
And, but they're picking, and so they're picking their tickets. Like they're doing it because they're being nice to them. They turn the screen around and they're like selecting the tickets, and it's like taking forever. The guy that's in front of me is like complaining. I'm just like, I can't complain. There's like old ladies, fine. And
sweet old ladies.
But when I go back in, the place is much more full. Like it's right before the previews are going to begin, and I feel people looking at me almost. Where I'm like, I guess because it looked
wrong theater.
I guess it's because I looked like I was also alone. So it's like
yeah.
But I'm like, no, I love this shit more than you do. That's what I wanted to say. Don't look at me, old lady. Take your eyes off me.
Transformers 2 is over there, son. You're in the wrong theater.
No, I am here for the Dowager. Don't you understand it?
Mr. Bates.
I have, I call Micah Mr. Bates all the time. In fact, I probably can't show it. You know how you can give everyone a picture on your iPhone, and
sure, of course.
I have her picture as Mr. Bates, and the reason I call her that is because I have a man crush and almost like a fake crush on Mr. Bates.
Okay,
and so I make it seem like that's like the guy like who I want her to be is Mr. Bates.
That is a strange man crush. I mean, I get the Mr. Bates energy. Love the guy.
It's like a fake one. I have real man crushes. That's not really one of them. Although I did always find it weird when the show began, there was like a middle-aged women movement being like, Mr. Bates is the fucking hottest shit ever. I remember there being like I don't want to say it's an Oprah. I don't think Oprah might have even been around at this point, but it was like something like that where they got women all together and they were gushing about how hot Mr. Bates was, and then they had him on and they were freaking out and all this stuff.
Wow.
And, yeah.
It's the energy, right? Yeah. It's the attitude more so than that's stoic, very manly, right? Mm-hmm. Could be the trick leg.
It's very Victorian. Dude, the Victorian and Edwardian era is so cool, man. Like,
I agree.
I'm a prude. Everyone knows that. I'm not super into like sexualizing everything. It's like enough already. I love the energy behind this like old Victorian courtship. How fucking incredibly frustrating it must be. And how by the rules you have to play it, but you're kind of trying to get her behind the scenes. You're trying to kind of slip her a note, you know, and this dance that you play, and it all culminates, and there's something really cool about that.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
That's fucking dope. Personally.
Suppression, right? Like you got to act like you're not an animal. Like you got to be a gentleman. I mean, being a gentleman was like that still exists today, but so much more so back then. That was really nothing else was acceptable in that society, in that level of society. You know.
Yeah, and how taboo everything was. So it's like there's something so.
Good point.
There's something great about. I don't know. To me, as like a lover of story, as many are, I just think that that's like such good stuff.
It's good. That's a great point, man.
So Downton Abbey that's why people are like, what is it about Downton Abbey? I'm like, just watch it. Just fucking watch it. How can you not tell what it is about Downton Abbey if you just watch it?
I never really thought, and you know what, I'm not even trying to be gross, but the payoff back then must have been, and you know what I mean by payoff, right?
Yeah.
That must have been so much more gratifying.
Oh my God.
Because you had to work so hard to get there.
Well, it reminds me, there's a scene, it's a little disgusting, but I don't know if you remember this. There's a scene in John Adams on HBO where John is in France for many years and England and all this, and he's been gone. And Abigail comes and sees him. I don't know if you remember this scene or not. And they're having like they haven't seen each other in several years, and they're having this very courtship like proper thing. But then they just like, when they're alone, they just go crazy. And what I remember about it, to the point, is it's so gross that I remember this, but it sticks out as like they have sex for like 5 seconds because it's been so long, you know, that. And I
love the realism.
The repression is so high.
Sure.
It's a great scene.
That is awesome. And I'm sure that's been you would know this. I'm sure that's been written about, right? Like,
that's all based on McCullough's biography of John Adams.
That's awesome. I think I'm barely into that series, maybe 2 episodes in or something.
We got to do that.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
We should definitely cover. I'm going to write that down. We should do John Adams.
Yeah, that would be a good one for sure.
It'd be fucking awesome, dude. That's Paul Giamatti is fucking awesome.
He's so good. He's doing like a very shocking advertising campaign right now, and I'm not like a J.K. Simmons insurance.
Yeah, I've seen him. I've seen it.
He's a front man for a company now.
Yeah, I've seen it.
And I was just thinking like, and I'm not judging again, because guys like J.K. Simmons, amazing, one of our best actors. But I was very surprised to see Giamatti in that position because he's held up as like this iconic character actor. I mean, certainly he's a movie star now, but you know, so I don't know. That just I was just like, wow, I'm surprised to see that. But I think it's probably hard to say no to that money.
Oh my God, dude. It's probably a shit ton of money. And yeah, I agree, because I see that during football, his commercials. Some of them are funny. I usually mute commercials just straight up. I don't even listen to them. But I do like that the woman says something else, like, she's like, "'Tis the season," and he's like, "'Tis?" in his like very Paul Giamatti voice, but he's dressed like an old man. It's so good. It is
good though, because they're not taking themselves seriously doing that stuff. They're almost, you know, they're having a laugh at themselves almost because of the characters they're doing. So yeah, I take it back. I'm being way too judgy with, I apologize to Paulie.
Yeah. Take it back. And also a connection to Paul Giamatti, of course, is in Downton Abbey. He plays, the American brother that comes over and is totally awesome. And what I love about him is that he's richer than everyone that's in the show. And he's just like, doesn't give a fuck about anything. It's so great. Oh, he was awesome in that.
How did he get himself into that show? Of course. That's so Giamatti.
I know, he rules. All right. Let's get back on topic here, Dig.
All right, dude.
Let's talk a little bit about the 80s. We've talked a little bit about the 70s, but I'm kind of curious what your hallmarks of the 80s were. And you know, this is obviously the decade I was born in. I had no control over my fashion. I'll talk about what I remember about what I was wearing during this era. But I'm wondering what the hallmarks are to you. And I think there's a hallmark of the 70s and 80s that I wanted to specifically ask you about, which we brought up earlier, which was the graphic tee. I'm wearing my Firefly shirt right now. I love graphic tees. Everyone knows it. I've always been, here's the thing. I've always been confused. Like, why wouldn't you wear a graphic tee? It's almost, people wear plain t-shirts, but it's like, why? you can have something on you. So it's maybe just my mentality compared to other people's mentality. It's certainly not a sophisticated mentality. I certainly look like a man child wearing a Fireflies t-shirt.
No, once upon a time, but not anymore.
And so, well, that's what I wanted to ask you was what was going on with the licensed merch during this era? Because you had brought up some of the stuff with like Chips and Dukes of Hazzard and all the things that would come out during the 70s.
Yeah.
And I think you and I had mentioned this at some point. It's so weird to me that people weren't making shirts like I'm wearing with the Cobra logo on it. And that was it. Or like, it just didn't seem like things like that really existed. It was always like some flashy bullshit that was complicated on the early licensed graphic t-shirts that even I had access to. That's why when Hot Topic came around in the 90s and they started selling like a shirt with a Cobra logo on it, a shirt with a Decepticons logo on it, all these things, they flew off the shelves because dude, I was on the lookout. Trust me. I had never seen anything like that before that point. And so it's funny. I wanted to know your impression of the licensed merchandise from back in the day too, and the graphic tees and how those might have evolved and stood up.
It's a great point because our generations were really waiting for that with bated breath before it debuted. And I feel like you're right. I think it debuted, at least on a large scale, way too late. It's interesting to bring up the graphic tees because they're just, I mean, think about the nature of what a graphic tee is. It's such a simple, honest, obvious, and timeless way to just sort of communicate who you are and what you're into, right? To kind of represent yourself and to express yourself. And it's so interesting to see it embraced now because there was a period where when you reach a certain age, you were supposed to stop wearing that shit. And the Gen Xers know what I'm talking about because we were, in the thick of that when we were growing up, from going into grade school into junior high-ish and everything. Now, what's interesting to think about the graphic tees were that was probably when I was a kid, like I define growing up from being 0 years old to through 5th grade, where mom and dad, mainly mom in our case, was largely dressing us, right? And it was controlled by the clothes that she bought with maybe little or no input from us, right? And grandma played a big part of that too, because our grandma worked in Lord and Taylor. So she had access to not only the clothing and nice clothing, but also discounts. So grandma played a bit, and she also loved to shop. P.S. Grandma did. So she had a big part in what we grew up wearing too, especially Dana and I, and Allie to some degree. But the only autonomy we really had in that early period was kind of taking our pick, or at least suggesting what graphic tees we wanted. And I remember Star Wars t-shirts, specifically the really gauzy, old school, early 80s cotton t-shirts with those heavy duty iron-on prints that might even had the glittery patina to them. Mm-hmm. And begging mom and dad, right, especially exactly Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi era, where I was old enough to realize, like, I want that AT-AT shirt, or I want that Wicket shirt, or that R2 shirt. Or I remember there was a Jedi Luke shirt that I think had like Luke's bust holding the lightsaber, the green lightsaber, with Return of the Jedi underneath. Again, that sort of fancy, heavy-duty, glittery iron-on print, and I coveted this thing, and I begged for it. So those I remember being the first clothes that I looked forward to wearing. Like, oh, is that shirt clean? Because I want to wear it to school today. I'm in 3rd grade. I'm in 4th grade. But besides that, those were the only shirts. Those graphic tees were the only things we got excited about. Or if somebody wanted to give us a gift when we were little and they were over getting us toys, like our aunts, our grandparents, aunts on dad's side or whatever, we would get the Dukes of Hazzard t-shirt, the Chips t-shirt, the Happy Days. Maybe Dana was rocking a Laverne and Shirley shirt, because the 70s is when the graphic tee thing really started. You could think of that going hand in hand with like roller skating, right? Like the older kids are going roller skating, they're rocking their, whatever, Charlie's Angels shirts and stuff like that. That's where it started and came into the 80s. But that was the only thing that we really had any control over clothing wise until the 80s. And this is interesting, Kyle, because this is around the time you were born. This is around the time you came into the world. And I remember in 6th grade, because it's such a specific memory to me, because this is the exact same time I pretended to abandon toys and cartoons and stuff because you're supposed to be older going into 6th grade. Like I remember that being a real clear line of demarcation in my generation. It was like summer between 5th and 6th grade. You're going into 6th grade. Girls is going to be a thing. The more popular girls and boys in my grade were already like becoming an item, like going out, going steady and all that kind of stuff. So I remember like clothes and a consideration of how you looked and a concern with your appearance kind of became a thing in 6th grade. That was a very specific memory for me. And I remember it's the advent of really brand names, of wanting to have brand name clothing because that was the cool thing. And you wanted to be like the cool kids in our school and our generation. That was very specifically almost to a kid, the preppy kids. So you wanted to be like the preppy kids. And I can remember the boys and girls that were preppy. They seemed to have more money. They had the nicer clothes. You wanted to be like them. And oddly enough, this whole thing kicked off with me with Reebok in my generation. Reebok, I researched it because I was like, when did Reebok come out? Because I remember being in 6th grade. So this was probably 84 to 85. And Reebok became the thing. Like everybody had to have Reeboks. There was the Reebok pumps. There was the Reebok, like the lower Reeboks. And then there was I wrote this down so I didn't forget. Oh, the Reebok Freestyles were like the high top aerobic shoes. And then the Reebok clubs were like just the low cut, low top Adidas. They were like all white leather. They had the Reebok with the little Britain logo on it. But Reebok harkens back to the 50s. I don't know why it became such a thing in 84, 85, but
the right people probably wearing it or,
I remember how expensive they were. And mom and dad were like, absolutely not. And I think halfway through 6th grade, I had to wait about 4 or 5 months. Grandma and grandpa bought me my first pair. I looked back. Those shoes were $170
in the
1984.
Time. Wow, that's fucking crazy, dude.
Which I think they say is like $350 now or something. And I remember that being the first thing, but I remember that, and I look back with some shame. Like it's lame, right? But you got to go through that journey as a kid because
totally.
you want to be popular, right?
Totally.
You want the brand name.
I was laughing when you were talking about Reebok specifically because I always just think of Austin Powers when he's going through all the things that he's like catching up on when he's out of cryogenic freezing and he like is playing with the pump and it explodes in his face.
So good. But that shepherded in like a whole age for me. It's like I looked back and from 6th grade through the second half of 8th grade. So about a 2.5 year blip for me where I went through 2 specific phases, largely revolving around brand name clothes, 2 distinct eras with like a chapter 1.5 in the middle. And I'll explain this. But where it was really all about brand names and it was really all about kind of soullessly emulating the popular kids and what they wore. And I remember the brands. It was Swatch, largely really preppy stuff. Benetton became a thing, which was very expensive back then. Guess was a big part of this. Nike Jordans came out when I was in 6th grade. Now, interestingly enough, Jordan 1s, when they first came out, I remember it very specifically because they were $105. And I remember all the jockey kids or the kids that were really into sports really responding to that and wanting them and getting them. But I think there was some awareness even at that age for me of being like, all right, I'm not really into basketball, certainly like already phasing out of sports completely. So I didn't feel like I needed them. So I didn't go in for the Jordan trend back then. I got into Nikes much later on in the 2000s with SBs and stuff like that, went through my little period late. But I do remember like the very preppy gear, LL Bean backpacks. I remember like everybody had to have an LL Bean backpack. We didn't know. It all revolved around this, the awareness that something was cool and desirable just because it costs a lot of money, right? It was the pure expensive nature of this thing. And then that sort of era of the preppy clothes, which kind of got tossed in with me just wanting to sit like at the popular kids table in 6th and 7th grade in the lunchroom, in the cafeteria. Like it was all part of this. image before I really like a couple years before I really kind of discovered my own voice as a skateboarder and as an artist and all that kind of stuff. Just going through that period of really wanting to try to fit in, and the clothes being such a part of that, and just wanting to kind of blend in with the crowd rather than stand out. Like, that's what I really remember about that period of time. And you're not thinking about it like that back then. You're just thinking about it like, I really admire how popular and charismatic and cool and how sort of comfortable and, like this guy just seems really comfortable in his skin and cool, and the girls like him and everybody laughs at his jokes. And I think thinking the gear and the kit would help you achieve that. I remember really thinking that. And then the second period, which is interesting to think back on, where I was really kind of transitioning into skateboarding. It was almost like a transition period where it was still about brand names, and this was a really short-lived phase with me, maybe in 7th grade, maybe the second half of 7th grade, where it was like surfwear brand name gear, where it had to be like Ocean Pacific and Hobie and maybe like specific Jams brand shorts with the Hawaiian print. And again, it was I remember Ocean Pacific t-shirts it was $50 for a t-shirt. This is where that whole 80s era of, just, I don't know, what do you call it? Like, where things really started to become expensive.
Capitalism.
And really that capitalistic thing of the 80s
it's
where
totally predatory, like fashion capitalism, like consumption capitalism,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And on kids, and people were throwing down $50 for their kid's t-shirt, and their kid was still in junior high school. These kids were in middle school. So, and I remember, again, like, thank God we had grandma, because she had access to, they spoiled us, but also they had access to that discount at a department store that carried these things. So if grandma worked at Sears, I would have been shit out of luck. But because she worked at Lord and Taylor, and
you would have got some craftsman
brands,
shit though.
Would have got some Carhartt.
Yeah.
I would have been cool now.
Hell yeah, dude.
So that's what that was. And then there was one phase, a blip for me. And I can't wait to hear your middle school fashion thing, because I feel like this is a thick period in anybody's life, regardless of the era. There was a really weird, short-lived period in between my like Benetton preppy and Ocean Pacific fake surfery period, where I was rocking the, like, I don't even know what to call it. Like, I mean, really kind of like the rock t-shirts and the sort of like Cinderella and Rat, right? I was rocking like that whole period of
hair metal
band shirts, right? Where it was like jeans and hair metal bands. And there was a weird blip in between period where it was like maybe 6 months where I was like really, Poison was another huge one, right? Where it was like rocking the hair metal. And it was very hair metal specifically because I never crossed over into that genre of rocking, for instance, the denim jacket with the Iron Maiden patch.
Yeah, or Metallica.
Or the Megadeth or Metallica. Never crossed into hard rock. It was more that trendy MTV. Again, that hair
glam
metal.
Rock. Yeah,
glam rock stuff.
I love that shit.
Hair metal. And, so that was a weird thing. And like that whole period just revolved around, again, just getting as much brand name gear, how many swatches you could build up your arm, all that stuff. And, coming out of not caring about your appearance at all into like everything at that age, everything revolving around how you look. And of course, that being around clothes, and an interesting part of my journey where I felt like I didn't really have a voice. I was just kind of a robot. I was kind of like just a clone going through that phase of just wanting to be like everybody else.
Totally understand. Totally get it. I think a lot of it is about your environment, and that's certainly my middle school situation as well. Hair metal is funny because, and I just wrote this down because I didn't want to forget, hair metal is kind of like the disco of the 80s, for better or for worse. And that, can you imagine, like, what the fuck were they doing? It was, first of all, it's awesome. Don't get me wrong. I genuinely think it's awesome. Twisted Sister from Long Island, of course, a seminal hair metal band.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of love for hair metal, but imagine Dead Up Nikki Sixx coming up to like as he was, right, in 1985, coming up and just walking up to you today. It's like, what are you doing, dude?
Motley
you got
Crue.
Your hair is teased out like insanity. You're disheveled, but wearing the nicest clothes at the same time. You've got jewelry on. It's weird. It's just a whole weird aesthetic.
Yeah, the visual image was more important than the music. Where maybe they took, even bands like Zeppelin, the classic rock, some of the most talented people, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant. There was a definite consideration in the fashion, the look. That existed, but the music was still, I think you could argue, more important. Whereas hair metal was like, and that plays into the video age too, because their physical appearance and the way they came off visually was such a big part of selling.
Definitely.
The brand.
And it's not exclusive to them. I mean, think of Slipknot or Mudvayne,
sure.
Mushroom Head. I mean,
yeah.
A lot of the Ghosts
Kiss probably
today
started that.
Right, totally. And that's a band that you love. But I always looked at Kiss. You're right that Kiss is a progenitor of that. I think Bowie is as well. But I also feel like they're different. Like Kiss is different because that's glam rock and proto rock in its purest form. Before they're pre-video. They were doing this on the road. They were building themselves up in different ways. I think it's, you know what I mean? It's like
absolutely
for a love of the game kind of thing, I think.
Yes.
And I don't think that, like you said, it wasn't really quite like that later on. So I've always looked at Kiss as like something. Kiss has always been its own thing to me. Very much, they're not like as good as the Beatles in my mind, but they're like the Beatles, where it's like, oh, the Beatles, Kiss, Pink Floyd. They're just kind of on their own islands. Fleetwood Mac. They're just over there on their own thing. Their own thing. I don't even categorize them.
Absolutely. They are unto themselves. There's also a thing, much more about music than I do, Kyle. There's certain thing too that I'd like to know. I don't know anything about this, but with hair metal, glam rock specifically, we think of Poison, Rat, Cinderella, Motley Crue is a huge one that you brought up. On and on and on. It goes on and on and on. But I always think of it associated with Hollywood, but also the androgyny of the look, the makeup, the tight clothing, the feminine nature of the visual component of it seeming to be like a purposeful part of it. And, wanting to come across almost as women and just be attractive as a human rather than being attractive as a man or a woman specifically. What part of that did that purposely play? Like, did they talk about it that way, or was that just part of the uniform?
I think that was just part. It's funny you say this because what I think about when you ask this is, do you remember that Charlie Murphy Prince Chappelle show thing?
Of course.
And he says something about how he's like the hottest bitches were dudes or something. Like he says something like that. I don't know if you remember that, right? Like
Prince is what was it? Shalimar.
Yeah, Shalimar, right? He's like, he's like, that's the hottest motherfucker I ever seen. But it's like a dude or whatever. And that's what I was thinking about when you were saying that, because it is very much weird. Like no one, even then, the point of that was that I don't think he's kind of, the funny part about it is that not only his performance and the storytelling, but that he was in that situation and didn't know then what the hell was going on and was confused about it. So I think the answer is that it was a totally intentional, relevant thing. When you think about Prince,
yeah, I
mean, that's an intentional, like, what am I? Who am I? Are you kind of into me, even though you shouldn't be? Like, I'm really talented. I'm very handsome. It's vampiric.
Yeah. Yes. Very well said. The sexualness defies man or woman. It doesn't matter. The sexualness transcends the sexual nature of it. Like, as far as man or woman, it's just attractive regardless, or both ways, or it's meant to just blend or something. I don't know. It is interesting. I even think back to definitely like Disney villains and stuff. Like there's a certain, which definitely translated to like even anime villains of manga and anime of the 60s and 70s. Like there's something about that is really defines an era, right? And it worked because look, like these guys, I mean, Bon Jovi was even kind of walking the line of that early on. Maybe not super early on, but when they became MTV famous, because they were around a little while earlier. Duran Duran, even, right? So
love Duran Duran.
And these guys pulled chicks like crazy. I mean, like crazy rock star status, like they were doing in like the bands of Sabbath and Zeppelin were doing in the 70s. These guys were doing in the 80s, and it was like, it worked.
That's what
and they were good-looking people. Look at John Bon Jovi in his prime.
Totally, and I was gonna say, "Money for Nothing" by Dire Straits is all about this from a perspective of someone who is making fun of it. But yeah, it's all about your money for nothing and your chicks for free. Yeah. Because like it's all aesthetic.
Such an interesting time. I loved it. And I remember being a 12, 13-year-old boy watching these music videos, sitting planted in front of MTV and thinking these dudes, from Nikki Sixx to Bret Michaels to John Bon Jovi, thinking these dudes were like the coolest people in the world.
Totally. That's what I'm saying. That's why it's so funny that that's exactly what I was kind of feeling when I asked you about like Nikki Sixx just walking up to you today. The reality is that it would be weird today, but yeah, it was dope.
Oh, I loved it.
And I still think, I want to earnestly say, I still think that shit is cool. I still do. And I still think nu metal's cool, and I still think Slipknot's cool. So it's not like, but you know what I always loved about a band's aesthetic, and this is a band I love, but people make fun of, and I totally understand, is Limp Bizkit. Because what I like about their aesthetic is that they're actually all different from each other.
Yes.
Wes Borland, the guitarist, always has weird shit going on. He was dressed up as like for one tour as like a fucking Sioux Indian or something. And he dressed up in, in these weird masks and all this stuff, and totally out of place. But then Fred Durst is totally hip hop kind of, although he's becoming more of like an old man hip hop guy now. And then you have like DJ Lethal, who's from House of Pain and brings that old school kind of flavor and so on and so forth. And Sam Rivers, the bassist, is more buttoned up and preppy. So I like that. It's a little boy band.
That might have been the first time too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's like, well, it reminds me of, it's the first time I don't think they engineered that. I don't think that was like something they intentionally did. I think everyone was just allowed to do whatever they wanted.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of kind of the Spice Girls or something, where each one has like a little different flavor to them.
That's a great point. Much less demonstrative Village People, right? Where it's like everybody has a specific identity. Right. You're allowed to. And you know what I love about that? It's what attracted me to skateboarding early on. It's like, it could be a little hip hop. It could be a little punk rock. It's a blending of all these a little surf. It could be a little Vato, Latino, West Coast culture. It's like a blending of all these really cool things. Graffiti. It was like, you could be all these things, and there was a colorfulness and a realistic nature to that you didn't have to just be this one specific thing. But the hair metal era is so interesting the more I think about it, because they really marketed themselves, especially through music video and visual imagery, in such a bold way that you knew exactly who it was by looking. Each member had a specific look, whether it was their hair color or the instrument they played. There was a lot of pageantry, and that was very entertaining for us Gen Xers, junior high and high school kids. I mean, yeah, we ate it up.
Totally. Yeah. Why wouldn't you? It's good shit, man. I mean, I think there is an aesthetic element to music. It's very deep and important. Music videos were one way to explore it. I still love music videos today. It's kind of a dying art, I think, or it's not as important. I think it's important in some genres more than other, but it's still a way people share and their music and all of that. But it's not the same as it used to be at all.
No.
But I think there are other elements too. Like I've told people, Dredge, one of my favorite bands, I've contracted the bassist in that band to make 2 different paintings for me that are visual representations of songs, 2 of their songs that I love. And so I think there's so many different ways you can explore the visual aspect of song and fuse all those things together. And it's cool. I love that you brought up the Village People as well, because they're awesome. I mean, just totally awesome.
I mean, that was
young man.
Talk about that.
Micah and I always say that because I always say young pups to the pups when I'm young pups.
Speaking of young pups, that's a good segue. I'm going to let Kiki out. Can I let you out now? Kiki, you want to come on camera? Or you're not going to come on camera.
Let her out.
Let you out. Let's go. Come on.
Let her out.
You got to get out of here. Come on. All right, my friend.
She gone.
She gone. The cleaning, I hope the cleaning ladies are gone, or Kiki's going to torture them down there.
I was hoping to meet them, but not today.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, maybe next time. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about my middle school years, I guess, just in the sense
I can't wait to hear this.
Well, I think you'll remember this, and this is what I was saying about your environment being important to kind of foundationally building your fashion sense, of course, is hockey was all important to me during that era of my life. And the thing that I think exemplifies, and that if you asked anyone from that era that knew me would exemplify what I used to wear, were hockey jerseys all the time. I loved wearing hockey jerseys. And this was probably in like 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Although in 7th and 8th grade, I went to private school, and I'll talk about that because obviously we were wearing a uniform there. But I loved collecting hockey jerseys, and it was the thing I coveted. I didn't covet fashion. I didn't care about sneakers. I used to wear like just whatever, Adidas. I wore a lot of Sambas during that era.
Oh,
so that was, that was like the indoor soccer shoe era. Everyone wore that shit.
Shoes.
Me too. So comfortable.
Gazelles too? Did you wear Gazelles a lot?
No, I didn't wear those.
Okay. Sambas were nice.
Yeah, Sambas that was all I knew. And so I loved those shoes, and I wasn't so worried. I don't even remember anything about what jeans I was wearing. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I used to love, instead of brands or anything, were just hockey jerseys. I wanted to buy hockey jerseys, and Mom would buy me one for my birthday, or I'd always get one for Christmas, and I would buy one here or buy one there. And I ended up with a pretty large collection of jerseys, and I would get names on the back of some of them. Obviously, some of them were just blank, it's more uncommon to see that now. It was more common to see that then. And I just loved certain teams. So my favorite team when I was a kid, I mean, I always loved the Islanders, but I was obsessed with the Sharks too, San Jose Sharks. And they came into the league when I was just coming into hockey. And so we kind of just ran into each other. And so I loved my Sharks gear and my Sharks jerseys and my Sharks t-shirts. And then I had my Islanders gear and my Islanders jerseys and all of this. And then I would go buy random jerseys. And a jersey that I specifically remember getting is Quebec Nordiques moved to Colorado, I think in 96, became the Colorado Avalanche. And so that first year, Mom for Christmas got me an Avalanche jersey, which was like a brand new thing. And it was at the old house on Marie Court where I got it. And I was like so amped. And what would usually happen was I'd ask for like one of 4 jerseys, and then you didn't really know what I was going to get. I remember I asked for a Coyotes jersey and didn't get it one year, and certain other things. But I ended up with a pretty big collection of not only NHL jerseys, but some other random jerseys too. I don't know if people know that this is my, I'll turn around. I don't know if you can see it, but that's a Northeastern hockey jersey from the late 90s. And where I went to college. And so that's just one of my collection of jerseys. And what's funny is that I gave a bunch of them to our nephew, Declan, not too long ago. I asked him if he wanted to go there. I have so many t-shirts, so many jerseys, all this random shit. And I was like, do you just want any of this stuff? Because I'm not going to wait. I part of me doesn't want to get rid of some of this stuff, but it's like, what am I even saving this for? So he came through and took some of my key items. Like he took I have an old Vancouver Canucks jersey with the old yellow and red logo they don't use anymore. And Derek was saying he was sporting that the other day when I saw him, which was funny. When he was out with his friends. He took my first run Tampa Bay Lightning jersey and a few other things. So it's cool. Like that really is emblematic of that era for me. Of course, I wasn't wearing them every day. I didn't have enough to wear them all the time, but every week, every few days, I'd be wearing a jersey to school. And the other thing that was big for me, Dig, and I think a lot of people will be able to relate to this, was the starter jacket.
Oh, yes.
The starter jacket was everything. And I wanted a starter jacket so badly that like I couldn't even stand it. And I ended up getting a Sharks starter jacket in like 1993 or 1994. And I was like fucking so excited. And I quickly outgrew it. And then I had other jackets after that, but that I had to throw out there was that was a key component. And of course, hats, different sport hats. But of course, I became well known after some time of wearing a Yankee hat always. And that was a key component of my fashion in quotes. And that began in middle school as well, wearing basically the same Yankee hat for years. I've had 3 Yankee hats that I wore over 15 or 17 years or something.
That's amazing.
And you'll remember I lived in that Yankee hat, especially when I was in college and afterwards, not so much at this point. So I needed to point those things out. Yeah, that fashion wasn't so important to me. Like the brands, I don't remember any of that stuff because it wasn't relevant to me. What was really relevant to me during this middle school era was just hockey, and other sports stuff too. Like people will remember this, that I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, there were certain expansion teams that were coming around, like the Charlotte Hornets in the NBA, the Colorado Rockies in the MLB, and the Sharks were one of those teams in the NHL. And so you would just see their stuff around a lot. And I ended up getting a Colorado Rockies hat at some point and a Colorado Rockies like t-shirt that came with like Colorado Rockies shorts. You know how you could buy like kids the set? And I had that with the Charlotte Hornets as well, and certain other things. And I used to love wearing those. And I think mom would stop me wearing them so much because it made me look like I had like 3 pairs of clothes, 3 things to wear. And they didn't want my teachers to think that I was like, being neglected or something like that. So those were really relevant to me too. And then I had to say that I have this very distinct memory of your fashion bleeding into my fashion, although that happens in high school, and we'll talk about high school in a moment. But I remember you dressing me up in your old clothes sometimes, even when I was in middle school. Definitely. And I have a very vivid memory of a red Adidas shirt with a blue Adidas logo on it, I think.
Yeah.
And you used to let me wear that when we would like go to the arcade or go to the mall, and you would give me like a cut off pair of jeans when we would wear the absurdly large jeans, and you'd hook me up with those as well. So I remember a lot of that too, which is cool and a fun memory.
I totally remember dressing you in that.
Yeah. It's fun.
And you would hop on the skateboard too, and you would do like little rock and rolls, like kind of like do little half ollies up the curb. You were little. I mean, you were probably 6, 7 years old at that point. Maybe even, probably 6, 7. Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah. Doing the best I could.
That was, it's so crazy that you bring up the hockey jersey because, I think you were doing it even before I feel like we knew Kevin Smith was doing it. He was so into the hockey jersey
totally.
thing.
I was definitely, I will admit that I was not introduced to Kevin Smith until you introduced me to Mallrats, which happened several years after it came out. Because me and my friends were obsessed with that movie because you showed it to us.
Yeah.
And that was maybe 10th grade or something like that. So that would be 1999 or 2000.
Oh, was it that late? I think you're right.
That's after 3 of his movies already came out, but I wasn't familiar with him at the time. I just wasn't connected to that stuff. So I can authentically say that Kevin Smith had nothing to do with the reason I was wearing jerseys. But I'll also say that during that era, it's important to note, I lived in New Hampshire and Maine, and a lot of people were wearing hockey jerseys. It wasn't like just me.
That was hockey culture.
And also, hockey jerseys were big in this era on MTV in hip hop videos. I remember, dude, I remember seeing, I think like Biggie, I'm pretty sure wore like an Oilers jersey or something random like that in one of his videos.
Sounds right.
And so you would see that sort of thing too. And I always wanted an Oilers jersey so bad. I never got one.
Never got one?
No. I love that logo. That Edmonton.
Yeah, that was a big thing in hip hop. The sports jerseys in general, because of the color schemes and matching them with your kicks and your hats and all that kind of. I can't even envision like a school age Colin without the hockey jersey. The hockey jersey was such a big part of your appearance as a junior high and high school kid. I feel, or especially like younger grade school Kyle. Like
I would try to in high school. I refined it down wearing like some Islander stuff, and what like really that's when I became very Long Island when I went back to live with Dad again. Yeah, and I shed because I was always a diehard Yankee fan. There was no one else. There's going to be no one else in baseball. But at hockey, I had like, well, this is my Eastern Conference team and this is my Western Conference team. I was obsessed with hockey.
Sure.
And so when I and with football, I didn't even get into football until high school either. I just wasn't even really very aware of it, to be honest. I think a lot of that had to do with hockey, playing hockey. You're just totally distracted during that season. You can't really do it all from a playing standpoint. I'm sad about that because I think football is amazing. And I wish I was aware of how much I loved it when I could still have tried to play. But because I would have totally loved to play football. But I feel like there's this thing that happened to me when I moved back to Long Island in the late 90s and went to high school where I was like, I'm going to refine myself to really just being about the Islanders, obviously root for the Yankees, discovered the Jets during that era and became kind of like your Long Island townie, in some sense.
Yeah. I feel like you have to leave and come back in order to appreciate, where you're from.
And and what's so funny is now I would never wear another team's jersey in any sport ever. I remember I lost a bet in college, and my ex-girlfriend in college was a big Giants fan, and I had to wear a Giants jersey in a picture. And I was like so embarrassed.
That's painful.
You know, I was like, it was a Tiki Barber jersey. And I was like so embarrassed. I was like, sucks. But it was what it was. And but I would never, ever wear anything for any other team. But the Isles, the Jets, and the Yankees. That's it.
Yeah. No, I hear you. You got to stay true.
I'm a Yankee poser right now. I'm very serious about that. Like, I'm not engaged with the Yankees like I was at one time. So I don't really rep them anymore. You know, like I've pulled for them. I was thrilled when Aaron Judge got, re-signed and all that, became the captain. I pay attention to it cursorily, but I don't pretend like, that's why I don't wear my gear or wear a hat or wear a shirt. It's like, I'm really not in anymore.
Oh, that's funny. I feel like you've earned it. I don't feel like you have to be like, have your nose in the papers every day and follow them from, all 165 games and all that kind of stuff. You've earned it. I think you've earned it. You could still.
I appreciate that, because I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
If and when the Islanders or the Jets ever win a championship again, I'm going to be checking everyone's papers. Believe me, before you get on the bandwagon, I will be examining your work, your paperwork, and make sure everything's in order. All the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. I'll know the deep and unabiding suffering, particularly of Jets fans, which I can't wait to pass on to a son one day if I have one. It's nuclear, dude. Especially at this point. I don't know if you knew anything about this season, but it's like it's like meltdown, straight up meltdown mode. It's awesome. I've been showing Micah. There's nothing funnier than New York area sports radio, and Mike Francesa and all these guys are fucking hilarious characters of our lives when you come from that area, and they are just melting down day after day, week after week about the Jets. And I keep making her listen to it because I'm like, these guys are so funny. Like, not even trying to be, but are just such funny characters.
Yeah, there's something that comes with, well, you know what, you've earned that too, because you could gatekeep the shit out of that, because a big part of that, like, satisfying eventual payoff is that you suffered for so long. You have to earn it.
I've watched,
and you could only come through that victory through all that suffering.
Totally. I've watched every Jets game. I want to be very clear about this. Every single one since at least 2008. The only one I missed was I was on a plane to Japan.
That's a long time.
That was 2013, I guess. 2014. They were playing the Packers, and I listened to it on the radio.
You were still there. You stay tuned in for the whole thing, even if it's going devastatingly bad?
Sometimes. No, I've tuned out. So I have Sunday ticket. And so I can watch every game. And so there's a vertical, and you just quickly select whatever game you want. It just goes to that game. And then you select another one. It just goes to that game. So when I'm constantly rotating through that when the Jets aren't playing, it's probably annoying as fuck to watch football with me, actually. So I'm just constantly going to these various games. But when the Jets are on, I stay with the Jets. But when it's devastatingly bad, I'll usually flip to another game and then flip back every so often. And the vertical shows the score and the time, so you can see if anything's happening.
Oh, okay.
But I will admit that the Jets had a come from behind, like miraculous come from behind victory against the Browns in week 3 or week 4 this year, and I was watching like another game while it happened. Yeah, I did miss that.
See, that's the danger. But you're checking in with other games via fantasy too, right? I mean, it's
fantasy and just interest. I'll watch. I used to be this way about hockey and baseball, but I'm not anymore. Where I'll watch any game, any football game, like any NFL game, I'll watch it. And so I watch every Monday night game, every Sunday night game, every Thursday night game, every year, plus whatever's on Sundays in the afternoons. But yeah, that's the risk you run. But I was talking to Micah about this recently too. I keep saying that, I'm sorry, but she's the only person I talk to. That that I feel like there has to be some sort of transactional thing where if you didn't show up to play and it's clear and you fucking suck, and I've watched this for 3 quarters and I'm missing a good game somewhere else, like, fuck you guys. I showed up. I paid for this service. I have my shit on. I'm ready to go. And you didn't show up to play. Why would I watch you for all 4 quarters? I've seen enough. Yeah, there have been games like that. And I think that, and there are other times where the Jets are getting beaten, because I've seen that, dude, the Jets are so bad traditionally. You see them. This has been a remarkable year that they weren't blown out all year, which is incredible. There's usually 1 or 2 games where they get blown out by 40 plus points. No joke. And sometimes when those games happen, I sit and force myself to watch it all. Like, you're going to sit here and watch it all. But nonetheless, I show up every single game, every single year and watch that team.
That's die hard.
And I'm going to be honest with you, they're never going to win another Super Bowl. I think the team is totally cursed. There's just something fucked about them.
Don't say that.
But if they do, I'm going to be checking. And I'm going to ask for records. I'm going to ask for proof, histories, provenance. You got it.
Hey, you've earned that. I believe any sports fan that suffers with their team like that, knowing full well, even if you have a little smidgen of optimism going into the season, knowing really that it's going to go badly and that you're still there, dying the wool, you've really got your rite of passage.
I'm going to explain the Jets season to you in four records, okay? The Jets were 5-2 this year. Okay?
Yeah.
Then they were 6-3.
Okay.
Then they were 7-4.
Okay.
Okay? Now they're 7-9.
Oh, wow. What were they previous to 7-9?
7-4.
Oh,
so
wow.
all they had to do was finish 500 and they would have made the playoffs. And in fact, when they were at those records, so when they were at 5-2, I started saying that aloud. I was like, all they have to do is finish 500. And so the next 2 weeks, it would be 6-3, 500. I'm like, all they have to do is finish 500, 7-4, so 500 again. And then I kept saying it like as they were losing 1 game in a row, 2 games in a row, 3 games. I'm like, they just need to win 1 more, 2 more, and then they're at a runway. It's over. So,
oh man, now that losing streak. Did they lose were they stacked against really good teams, or did they lose to marginal teams? No, that was the worst part. It was like very winnable, not all of them, but very winnable games, most of them. Oh, man,
the only good news is that we have a great defense, but we can't score any points. But nonetheless. All right, Dave, let's talk about high school and our high school year.
All right.
I'm curious about what your memories of your high school fashion sense. This is when I assume skating and that culture really fuses with it. And I also feel like high school becomes a little more relevant because, at least for me, this is when I first even began to really care about clothing. So I'm not like jerseys or anything, but for me, where I started to become a little bit more aware of how I look, how I dress, because I just didn't care very much. I really didn't. I don't think I started to truly care until maybe 10th grade and certainly 11th grade. So I'm wondering what your memories are of your particular high school era, which is the late 80s and early 90s.
I'm jealous that you got through junior high school without, dwelling on your appearance, because and I think back. Go ahead.
Quick, I'm sorry. It's important to note that the reason that is because I was in private school and had to wear a uniform. So that's important to note. That was a big formative thing for me. So please go on.
I think there's a part of that really resonates with me, where kids don't have to worry. I know that's a big part of the conversation is in terms of identity versus not really having to worry about the peer pressure. But there is something kind of refreshing about not having to think about that when you're so young, because there's going to come a point like high school where you're going to have to, that's going to be a big part of your pressure, the pressure of being like a kid and fitting in and all that. But yeah, high school, I was looking forward to getting to this part because this is where, and this was actually prior to high school for me, because this is the second half of 8th grade. So the spring of 8th grade. So just a little before high school started, where I was able to abandon my soulless, vacant shell of a kid, just trying to fit in with the popular kids and stuff like that. And going through that 2.5 years of just trying to do what everybody else was doing, where I really kind of found my voice and I found the thing I became really passionate about, which was skateboarding. And my skateboarding style over late junior high and then the 4 years of high school is interesting because it's 2 distinct periods. But when it started in 1987 and then my first year of high school in September of 87, skateboarding looked a very specific way. It was very loud. It was colorful. It was sort of punk rock and skulls and bones and metal imagery mixed and blended with surf and surf culture and surf brands and a surf color palette. There were really no rules yet, at least the way we perceived it on the East Coast. We weren't privy to California's skateboarding, where skateboarding started to get big in the mid to late 70s and then died and then became big again towards the middle of the 80s, there was a slower burn here. You know, there was a waiting period where it got big everywhere else and came outside of California. But the refreshing part of thinking back to just skating was the whole purpose was to stand out and do something different. And it was really refreshing and something new and a new look, especially for growing up in the Northeast, where I had just come from wanting to rock what everybody else was rocking. This was a whole different thing of like really the excitement of really finding your voice and trying to sort of represent and express yourself in a cool way. And it is so interesting, Kyle, to think back of, you know, as East Coasters and young kids, we didn't really know the difference between like the California skate scenes back then, where it was like Venice and Dogtown versus the Valley, which was essentially like punk, gnar, street, biker aesthetic versus like a Beach Boys clean cut, preppy, pastel-y thing. You know, there were two different camps out there. But what was cool about when we discovered skateboarding via MTV and the magazines and whatever pop culture commercial thing we got introduced to skateboarding with, or the cool older kids, was that we just kind of threw it all together. It was like a mashup for us. So we were just rocking like Vision streetwear with like a skull and a bones t-shirt, like all the Powell graphics back then were skulls and bones, and Santa Cruz had all the blood and guts type, you know, Slasher and Jeff Kendall and all these dudes. And, you know, we'd rock that with Life's a Beach and Vans. Like we were introduced to off the wall slip-ons, like the checkered Vans. That was a brand new thing in the mid to late 80s. And we were rocking it all together. As long as it was skateboarding, as long as we picked up a Thrasher or a Transworld magazine or a CCS catalog or something, and it was in there, it was cool. You know, as long as it wasn't a distinctive department store flavor, like even Nash, brands like Nash and Variflex back then, like we thought were super dope until we found out like, no, the only thing that's legit is the thing you could get like in a surf shop or a skate shop. If you're getting your gear and your kit at Kmart, that's not legit. So as we quickly realized, like there was specialty stuff and brands that you could rock and not rock, anything went. So, and it was all about being loud and being colorful and being like, you know, just standing out as much as possible and clashing and all that kind of stuff. And that was fun because it was new to us and there were really no rules. And even the other kids, like the jocks and the preppy kids and the more conservative kids that were just in the sports and stuff, they really couldn't judge it because they had no basis for judging any of it. They didn't know it. It was all so new. And it was so exciting back then because two things. I feel like my generation, everybody or almost everybody, or there was a certain percentage, like maybe 60% of people actually came through skateboarding and tried it. Maybe they quickly realized it wasn't for them. Maybe they quickly realized they want to return to, you know, playing tennis or baseball or lacrosse or whatever they were into. But I remember a certain contingent of kids trying it and not sticking with it. So by the time I was in ninth grade, they were already over it. And then the hardcore kids remained. But basically what it came to was that there weren't really that many hardcore skaters where we grew up. And it was always so exciting to go out to a mall or shopping with your parents, food shopping, whatever, and seeing somebody else with the gear on because you knew they had to know about it because you had to go to like a skate shop or a bike shop that started carrying the skate products, a surf shop that started carrying the skate products in order to get the stuff. It wasn't easy. It wasn't obtainable at like Caldor or Woolworth or whatever. So you knew that person was really into it. And there was a certain excitement with that building fan base or enthusiast base of this new thing that was, I think, widely seen as a trend, like a yo-yo at first, and then sort of slowly came into like, no, this is a new culture. This is a new subculture. This is the thing that's going to stick around. And it's been interesting to watch the highs and lows of skateboarding, the way it's kind of gone in peaks and valleys over the years. And now it's very popular with a skate park in every town and the suburbs and all these places to skate in the cities, and it's a big thing now. But back then it was really specialized, and it wasn't a big genre yet, and that was really exciting. So that was really, and that represented for me, again, like through the second half of 8th grade, all the way through, I would say, the second half of 10th grade, before skateboarding started to kind of die again after it enjoyed that late 80s, early 90s burst, and then started to kind of dwindle again. Then skateboarding changed, and I'll get to that point after you kick off your high school stuff. But so there's a very distinctive second phase of high school where skateboarding kind of went underground, and then it became even less people, and the styles changed and the aesthetic changed. And that was another real clean, clear line of demarcation for skateboarding. But that first half I'll always remember because, we associate it with Tony Hawk and the Bones Brigade and Christian Hosoi and a lot of the vert skaters. Street skating was just starting to become a thing where it was becoming, and it was a very smart thing because that's what really made skateboarding accessible, because we didn't have 12-foot vert ramps or hollowed out pools in our backyard, in the East Coast. So, skateboarding was a brand new thing with Mark Gonzalez and Nadas Kappas and all these, and Rodney Mullen doing his freestyle, and all the pioneers of what skateboarding would become coming out of the transition era of vert and pool and contests. And the old pro skaters of the late 70s and early 80s were becoming the company owners. Very exciting. And just becoming, just having something to kind of form my whole identity around was just fun, because it was the first time I felt like I could inherently exhale and just have a voice in something that I felt like really clicked with me, and that I clicked within, really something that spoke to me. So that was that got me through my first couple of years of high school and being identified as a skateboarder, and something always felt really good about that to me. It's the first time I ever really had that.
Man, it's interesting. It's so funny you were there really at a seminal point. Skate culture is so mainstream to this day.
It changed so much.
Right. And it's evolved many times. All right. So for me, high school is strange. I think I came in. So I went to private school in 7th and 8th grade in New Hampshire. We wore uniforms, and you had very limited ways you could express yourself there. We didn't wear ties in middle school. We didn't start doing that until high school. So there was even no way for you to express yourself with ties, but people used to wear maybe some different belts. I said once I had a mohawk, and I went in and they made me go home to cut it off before I went back to school.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. I went to Sister Monica, the principal, and she sent me home.
Holy cow.
And so there was very limited ways to express yourself. But when I went into high school in 9th grade back on Long Island, I think I was just kind of, I was like in a growing at a glacial pace, because I had all these years where I wasn't really wearing anything. Like I remember we had like dress down days, so-called dress down days, and you can dress like a normal person. And I would wear like a stormtrooper shirt or something like that, and whatever limited things I had. But I kind of kept that going into high school, and I was very nerdy and probably very childlike for high school in some way, wearing Star Wars shirts and doing all these kinds of things. In 10th grade, I really kind of finally shook that off, that rust off, as it were, and really discovered more of like a rocker, I don't know, new metal. I was of the age of new metal. So one thing that I think you'll probably remember is that I always wore a wallet chain beginning in like late 9th and 10th grade.
I do remember that.
And it was stolen out of my wallet or out of my locker in 12th grade at gym, like I've said. So that's the only reason I stopped wearing it. But yeah, I used to wear a wallet chain. That wasn't like huge, but it was like and that was like part of my aesthetic, and like my ball bearing necklaces that I had. I had like some necklaces that I would wear that were basically like various chains that you would buy at Home Depot, basically, for various things like plumbing and stuff like that.
I remember that.
And so that was like a real big part of it. And then I discovered band t-shirts for the first time. I had a few Rage Against the Machine shirts. I got my first 311 shirts and all these different things. So I loved wearing those. And that was, I mentioned Hot Topic. That was like, I think Hot Topic's kind of a joke today. I don't know, but it was pretty important for us in the 90s to get access to a lot of things that we couldn't even believe we were getting access to in such an easy way. It wasn't easy at that time. The internet existed, but people weren't really buying anything on it. Not everyone was even on the internet during this era. And it wasn't as easy as you have to go see a band in concert to get a shirt, right? And I remember that was like a big thing when I would go see bands in high school, is to try to get a shirt. And then these shirts started popping up at places like Hot Topic, and it was cool and it was accessible. And so I started buying a lot of those different Limp Bizkit stuff and Linkin Park and whatever I was listening to at the time. So that was a pretty important part of my high school aesthetic. But when I went into 11th grade, I decided I was going to pick up so this was 2000. I decided I was going to become more preppy, like intentionally. This was the first time I remember having intent with fashion in some way.
Sure.
And I'm like, I'm going to wear button down shirts most of the time, or like, wear like a polo shirt or something like that. I'm going to wear nicer jeans. I'm going to wear nice dress shoes, like black dress shoes, like not shiny ones, but nicer shoes, not sneakers, or anything like that, like a boot style shoe. And I totally did that in 11th and 12th grade, but it started to kind of fuse with I had skater style sensibilities. Specifically, I loved etnies during this era. And so I would often,
the etnies.
I loved etnies. I don't know what happened to that brand, but I loved the fat profile of an etnie shoe back then. I almost looked like a Mega Man character because you were wearing these baggy pants that gave you like this big boot almost.
They were chunky. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I loved those, and I would wear those, and I would wear t-shirts once in a while and dress down, as it were. But I definitely had a more intentional preppy style, button down style that, again, I rediscovered at IGN those many years later. And I remember going and buying your school clothes. That was never really something I wanted to do. I always kind of hated doing it. And I remember that year was the first time I enjoyed doing it. And we went to Bob's, so not very high fashion, but Dad let me just go and pick out a bunch of different button downs, your various jeans, whatever. And it was cool. And I put together this kind of wardrobe that I still remember to this day. And it worked for me because I was becoming more, I was never popular. I wouldn't say that at all, but becoming more of like a person like that was respected and identified and talked to and stuff, as opposed to just a nerd or something like that. And girls started paying attention to me, including girls that I thought were way out of my league. So that was an interesting element of it too. But I don't maybe give myself enough credit for myself in my younger years as well, where I don't think I was as weird as I think I was. I just think that was kind of an inflection point where I started to try to dress differently and just like look better. And that didn't really carry into college because I was a complete schlub in college. So I was homeless looking when I was in college for most of the time. I went a whole year without even cutting my hair in college, which was hysterical. I had a huge afro.
It was a blowout.
It was awesome.
I feel like that's a familiar thing and a pretty typical thing to just kind of give up early in college.
Oh yeah.
Right. It feels like 13th grade a little bit. You're just ready for something to give. Plus it's hard, it's hard work. You're hitting the books. Yeah. I feel like that's kind of a typical reaction to just leaving high school and starting college. It's just like, let me give up my appearance for a minute. It's not important.
Yeah, it's exactly. Other things. And there's also girls kind of dig that too when you're in college. So you can kind of have it both ways. The more like, I don't care,
emo.
Whatever. Yeah. It's like, whatever. So yeah, that's basically my high school experience anyway. And again, I just want to give a shout out to etnies because I loved that brand. I loved etnies, and I loved Airwalk and DC and others too, but Airwalk specifically became more of a budget brand somewhere along the way. It wasn't always, it's hard to explain that to people. Like, I don't think it was always like that, but at some point it became like a more budget brand. But by that time I was already, and DVS or whatever was another brand. I had a few of their shoes. Yeah. So I loved skater shoes. I just found them very comfortable. But there was a pair of blue and gray etnies I had, which they were legendary in my mind. I loved those things, and I wore them for years. I wore those all the way through college, like, here and there. Like, I would just kind of be in my rotation. So yeah, shout out to etnies. But
etnies might have got folded in with Emerica. I'm not sure, which is a Canadian brand. An old freestyle pro, Per Welander, owned it or ran that company for years. He was one of the first pro skaters that became like a big businessman. It's an interesting part of the conversation because I think Ken Block, one of the founders of DC, just passed away 2 days ago. Tragically, like suddenly. it's interesting with skate brands. Like you mentioned DVS, Etnies was another one, Airwalk, where they go from being core brands to eventually, I guess, changing hands enough times, corporate wise or ownership wise, to becoming like box store brands, right? Emerick is held on. Airwalk may still be around as a box store brand. Etnies, I think, got folded in with Emerick. DC might still be a legit skate shop brand. I'm not exactly sure, but now we have Lakai, we have Nike SB. But yeah, those classic, I mean, if you ask a lot of old school skateboarders, they'll say certain models of Airwalks were some of the best, like the Chukka boot type style Airwalks were some of their favorite shoes with the gum sole and everything. Like those are classic, and they were core sneaks at a certain point.
Yeah,
but I remember you rocking all that stuff. You were really, it's interesting about the plaid shirt thing, because that's a great way to kind of look good, dapper things up a little bit, but kind of stay out of the name brand fray. Like you could rock a Ruka button down or Banana Republic or J. Crew, whatever, but it's not really the plaid shirt or even the flannel is not really about the brand name. It's just about a certain aesthetic, colors or whatever that look good with khakis or jeans. So that's a nice way to kind of sidestep. You did a good job with that, of like not just staying out of that brand name stuff. I mean, you were definitely in the starter jacket era, which I'm old enough to have just missed. The starter jacket's an interesting one. Yeah, and a lot of 90s brands too that you kind of sidestep because you just weren't, like Echo, Rockaware, Fubu.
Yeah, that wasn't stuff I messed with at all. I think because, well, like stuff with Fubu, I mean, the honest answer with that Fubu, Rockaware and stuff is we went to a very black school. Yes. And it's just like, this isn't really, you don't see white people wearing this stuff, right? Like It's not I know for us by us is Fubu literally, but it's not for you. Like this isn't something you have to pay attention to. Like the Inechi or whatever that was, that one thing.
Yes, that's another one. I forgot about that.
Like those different brands that I used to think for years I thought it was E-Nice. I didn't. So it goes to show you how. Yeah. So yeah,
we couldn't rock it authentically because
exactly that's just the way it was. Like I think dude, when you see old videos or old things, when I see someone like a white dude in a Fubu shirt or something, I'm like, that's weird. Like that's strange.
It was more of a Midwestern. There wasn't where people wore that universally where there was less awareness, I think, of the intention or just, the urban nature of what it was supposed to represent. I mean, there were certain brands, certain luxury brands, Polo, not Ralph Lauren specifically, but Polo, Nautica, Hilfiger, Donna Karan, specifically DKNY, not even Donna Karan proper. Like those kind of transcended hip hop and then crossed over into rave and then mainstream, a little bit of skate as well, especially the Dope Fresh Kids, that set. But so there were brands, but those urban brands specifically, I know a good friend of mine used to work for Echo, used to work for Mark Echo. So, so that is interesting. There's a lot of 90s fashion that you avoided that, by the way, PJ did not.
Yes.
He rocked it to the T.
I had friends that did too. My friend Cody specifically, I remember being very fashion conscious with, Hilfiger and all these things.
90s was big with that.
Yeah. And I don't know. The brands I was interested in the 90s, PlayStation.
Yes.
Nintendo.
Right.
311.
Yeah, like whatever, you did a good job with
like that. I just didn't care. And I've never really cared about, in my adult life, I've discovered brands that I gravitated towards. Some of them ended up being really nice brands, but not because they're nice brands, but because at a certain place or a certain time, they fit either the aesthetic I was looking for or they were comfortable. Like in college and then into my adult work life, I really loved Express. What used to be Structure, but it became Express Men. And I loved that store because before I became like more bulgy and fat, you would fit into they had a very slim European kind of clean aesthetic. I used to buy their button downs with the little dragon icon on them, or not the button downs, but the polo shirts and like their jeans. And I used to spend a lot of money there. And then that like kind of represented, and you could see it in some IGN videos. That's like one Colin aesthetic. And then I discovered other brands that I really liked later, like Lucky's Jeans was one, and a few others where I'm like, I just like the way that these really fit me.
The quality.
Yeah, it's like a very high quality jean that just agrees with my pear-shaped body. So so that's kind of, but I still to this day am not into, and I'm into brands like Mack Weldon and other things that I think are comfortable, but I don't give a shit. It's just for the comfort. So it was never about the fashion thing. I don't know how I avoided that. It wasn't an intentional thing. It wasn't intentional. I just didn't care.
Yeah, you weren't a label whore. You know, it wasn't about the labels with you. It's interesting too, as you get older and you go through all these fashion phases and different eras of your life where you go in for these things or you don't, to vet brand names, like you just said with Lucky, like Lucky jeans are known for their fitment, their quality. And, you know, I've been really hard on brand names too. Like as you get older, I'm just as much of a sucker for brand names now as anybody in certain things. But there are certain reasons. Like I could tell you, I'm lucky enough to be able to tell you, like driving an Audi feels a lot different than driving a Toyota because I've been there. And I know that the quality and the ride and the fit and finish and the quality of driving this car feels a lot better than what I had in the past. So there are certain things with quality and brand names where it's not just brand names. There's a reason you're buying that thing, but there's also a lot of bullshit, you know, and you go through that as kids and really, you know, it's just about being, at least that was my journey, was so typical of like just wanting to be that chameleon of like, I want to rock what the cool, popular, confident kid is rocking. And then skateboarding, you know, really ushering me away from that, where it was more like, in a way, finding your own voice, but also fitting in with a much smaller group that you cared about, not just fitting in general or with everybody, fitting in with something that you really believed in. Because I'm going to tell you about my second era of skateboarding, which is probably the second half of 10th grade through being a senior in high school, which was probably 90 through 92, I would say, where skateboarding really changed because all of a sudden everybody stopped skateboarding. You know, there were maybe 30 kids that skateboarded in your high school, and then all of a sudden there were 3 left. That were the kids that really wanted to stick it out, that stayed with skateboarding because it's something that really spoke with us. And it was interesting how the fashions changed too, due to how skateboarding changed. Like the whole daggers and skull and bones and blood and guts and slasher thing kind of fell away. And the image got much more cartoony with rip-off graphics and Dr. Seuss, and it became different. And I think because the old guys and the old ways were kind of getting ushered out, the 80s was coming into a new decade, and skateboarding was much less popular. And I think a lot of the earlier skating fashions started to get leveraged and adopted by mainstream. And I think it was a way for skateboarding to continue standing out and do something different. So like, for instance, Vans, right? Or we skated in Chuck Taylors in the late 80s. You know, we skated in Converse All-Stars, and it wasn't just the simple colored Chucks. It was, you know, tiger print and paint splattered and tie-dye and all these funky things. But then when Chucks started to come back into fashion, Chucks are interesting because they're almost like blue jeans. They come in and out of fashion over time, still to this day. When all of those things started to get leverage or different brand names, then skateboarding started to come into the big and tall era, which Colin will very well remember. So there was a very specific early 90s uniform of skateboarding, which consisted of way oversized everything, but especially jeans, white t-shirts, and you had to have very small wheels. Like the urethane was just enough to cover your bearings. I mean, they were tiny, like 30 millimeter wheels, and maybe like the short hair dyed blonde. Like there was a very specific look to early 90s skateboarding, and we went in for it hook, line, and sinker. Like we were all in. And I remember it must have looked so strange to people because our pants were so big. They had to be cut off jeans because they were always big and tall, so we had to cut them off. That if you were standing up, your entire pant leg would cover your entire shoe. You wouldn't see your feet. And we would shop at Big and Tall. And I remember it getting to such a degree that, you know, we were kids. You know, if we were a slender kid, like I was like a size 29 waist, I would go in and buy jeans or khakis even that were a 46 waist, 48, whatever we could get. It got so bad. It got so bad that I remember browbeating a friend of mine when we were shopping in Bob's, Big and Tall on Main Street in Patchogue, where he was getting ready to pick up a size of 42 jeans. And I was like, dude, what? Like, those are going to be tight. He was like a size 30 waist. So already the whole uniform had to include the cloth belts that were super long. So you would put the cloth belt on, and it was the one that went through like the brass belt buckle.
Love those.
And then so much of that excess belt would hang down because you had to have a huge belt.
Right. I love that style. I love the belt. I had the hanging down belt for
that was such
too.
A big. Yeah. Don't you remember that?
Yeah.
It was so 90s. It was such a warm feeling, but it must have looked so odd to just the average civilian because we looked crazy. I mean, that was as crazy a fashion sense, especially when it was new, as anything I could think of from prior decades. And you know what the funny, ironic thing is, Kyle? That whole early 90s huge jeans, blind jeans look has returned to skateboarding. I'm hoping. I don't like it. I don't like seeing it because even though the nature of skateboarding, the act of skateboarding physically has changed and it's a lot better. It's not about being ultra tech and super slow. And we were just learning all the switch stance stuff back then. So skateboarding really had a bad look back then. It's a lot different and more dynamic now. And kids are just a lot better and there's a lot more of them. But I don't like returning to that look. It just reminds me of that era, which I think we should leave in the past. The cool thing about skateboarding is I ask Lilia, you know, my daughter, she's going to be 16, who are the skateboarders in high school? And she honestly doesn't know because it's become so broad that there's really no specific look anymore. Like you could look like anything and be like a core skateboarder. You could be on flow for a company. You could be really good. Like you could be all about skateboarding and not look one certain way. And as a Gen Xer that grew up in skateboarding in the 80s and 90s, I'm not sure how to feel about that. Like, I don't know, like on its face, it sounds like a good thing, right? Like everything's accepted, come as you are. Like it doesn't matter. Like everybody's welcome here. But I don't know. It just seems a little counter to everything I grew up with where it was like, you know, you represented something by looking a certain way and you kind of represented who you were and what you supported and what you were all about by looking and wearing certain things, looking a certain way and wearing certain things, where it's different now. And I don't know if that's due to just a laziness or an open-mindedness, which would be very positive, right? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure, but it's crazy to see it change where my kids can't even identify who skates in the school unless they're carrying a board, you know, which is very interesting because that's very counter to how you and I grew up, where it was like, you could just look at somebody, you know, in church or in McDonald's or, you know, somewhere where the actual act of skateboarding or the skateboard itself is not involved and still tell that guy's a skateboarder. You know, so it's changed a lot now, but and that's what's so interesting to look back in the 90s where it was all about like rocking, you know, everything that was associated with skateboarding brands on your t-shirt, your board looking a certain way. And then, you know, in the 90s too, like where skateboarding became like, do you identify more with like the tech kids that do like the crazy tricks and wear like the nicer clothes and the chunkier shoes and skate slower and listen to hip hop? Or are you more associated with the dudes that ride fast and have the big urethane wheels and listen to either punk or heavy metal and skate aggro and all that kind of stuff? Where even in skateboarding that became two, or maybe even more, because then there were like the hippie kids. There became little subsets in the groups too, where it's like, which one are you? You know, which mold do you fit in and stuff. But back then it was all just like the big pants era, the big and tall era. There really weren't that many people skateboarding. It was a low point in the popularity of the activity or the sport, if you want to call it that. And, you know, maybe a lot of people are happy about that because that big pants, small wheels era was very specific to the early 90s. By the mid 90s, it was already like you're trying to fit into these little categories inside of skateboarding. And skateboarding kind of went back on an upswing, went back on a mid to late 80s upswing, you know, probably late in the 90s, and kind of stayed there with X Games and Street League. And Tony Hawk's Pro Skater had a lot to do with that, the advent of skate parks in every town and all that kind of thing. But, you know, I'm from an age where skateboarding was still coming into its own. It was still finding its footing, you know, and that's really interesting. So that was, and that, you know, that sort of trend also continued for me. I graduated in 92 from high school. So this whole era of skateboarding continued at least into the first half of college for me, and then when, you know, with rave culture and dancing and all that kind of thing clubbing and all that kind of thing started to adopt the skateboarding styles with the big jeans and everything, then skateboarding left that behind. I remember in 93-ish where the newest skate videos were coming out and guys were rocking like tight pants with that were like high waters, and they were kind of purposely bucking against, you know, other parts of pop culture adopting skateboarding. So skateboarding always evolved. And I'm very biased, but I do have that chip on my shoulder where I do believe that skateboarding starts a lot of this stuff in a quiet way and then silently leaves it behind and then evolves to the next thing. And I watched that happen with big pants. We watched that happen with, you know, wearing your t-shirts down to your ankles. It was all about big clothes. It wasn't just the jeans.
I also think hip hop, you know, in the 2000s really overtook, you know, I think of guys like Pharrell and NERD really fusing those two things together for the first time from my perspective.
That's a great point. Yeah.
There's always been a hip hop music element to skating, especially in the videos, but not so much fashion until
and skateboarding's link to rap first and then hip hop later was always a little more submersive. Like it just so like Public Enemy, right? A lot of skaters listen to Public Enemy because they like, you know, a lot of people that responded to skateboarding responded to rap music, responded to art, all that kind of thing. It just happened to be the same people. De La Soul, a lot of skateboarders listen to De La Soul. It wasn't that De La Soul were skateboarders. It just so happened that the same people went in for these things. But yeah, Pharrell and that set were the first time skateboarding and music were actually blending in a more concise way rather than it being like levels underneath, if that makes sense. It was a more concrete blending of the two things. And it was probably for the better because I think skateboarding became more open-minded. You know, skateboarding in the 90s too was very snobbish. There was a lot of gatekeeping, even within skateboarding. You know, I talk about my journeys of going into a new city, whether it was Boston or whether it was Supreme in New York, and being vibed. You know, I've been doing this shit since 1987. I don't want to walk into Supreme and be vibed. You know what I mean? I should be able to, it's a skate shop. I'm a skateboarder. You know what I mean? Or I would go to a new city like Boston, or I would go to LA, or I would go somewhere else where it was like, you know, you would walk into a skate shop and they would look you up and down. Like it was a bad look. You know what I mean? It was very aggressive and, the gatekeeping and just the lack of, I don't know. There was something very negative about it. In retrospect, I don't think we really realized it. I think there was that chip, you know, the chip on the shoulder. And I think that sort of attitude came out of that. But it's cool that it's a lot more open-minded. Skateboarding is a lot more open-minded now. But, you know, I went through the journey of being part of that era where skateboarding was getting to that point. And, you know, that was where, you know, and it also, you know, what's interesting about this conversation, Kyle? everything that we've talked about today, from being a little kid through high school into college, kind of feeds our fashion sensibility for now. You understand now, coming through all of that, what you respond to, what you go in for, what you're comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with, and not that it can't evolve also through your various phases as an adult, but I think it really does. Everything you come through with clothing and trends and fads and what you wear and the things you regret wearing and the better chapters where it's like, oh, that wasn't so egregious. It really informs where you arrive with what you want to look like. And it's interesting. It's really interesting. I mean, I love a nice suit. I love a nice tailored suit, but I don't wear them a lot. But how did everything that I just explained over the last 2 hours kind of inform that? Was it? I think it's Mad Men. So we'll answer that question.
I mean, that's it. Always goes back to that for me too. I think Micah thinks I'm
answer my own question
because I'm like, Don Draper is like everything I want to be.
Oh my God,
and she's ridiculous. Like, what? I'm like, not literally, but
not literally.
But I'm kind of in love with him. Like I have to just be honest.
He's really not, but he is.
No, he is. The old fashioned, the tailored suit. I love just the huge, like, I love how he has one shirt on, he takes it off, takes another one out of his dresser or out of his drawer in his desk and puts on another shirt getting ready. All musky. All right.
So good, dude.
That's enough of that. Well, this was a fun conversation, Dig. It was good to record another episode of KnockBack. We hadn't done it in a while.
It's been, I realized, I think it's been a month.
Yeah, we hadn't recorded. I think we recorded the last one in November. So we're recording this one in early January. And it's good to get back to form. I feel a little rusty still. So it's good.
Fun. Yeah. The rust is definitely there. Yeah. Although you were podcasting through a large portion of December.
Well, this is my third. December. I podcasted, probably did like 10 or more podcasts in December, but and I've done this is my third one in the new year, but I'm still getting my sea legs under me. Cause it's, I imagine it's a little bit like doing talk radio probably, where you just kind of get used to doing it. And then when you don't do it for even a few weeks, you got to redevelop that muscle a little bit. But hopefully everyone enjoyed the show. Thank you so much for your love, kindness, and support out there. Do we want to end with a dad joke as we usually do?
Yes, of course. And listen, we got two, if we go as planned, and we should, I think, our next two knockbacks, very big, very exciting episodes, both very different from each other.
Indeed.
But you guys aren't going to want to miss those two.
Indeed, and no more teases, because we won't be soliciting inquiries from the audience for KnockBack anymore, specifically because I feel like we're ruining the episodes when we do that by letting you know what they are before we release them. So that's
real surprises.
So these are going to be real surprises when they come.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that.
I wrote about that in the December letter. Like, that was a big intention of mine, was to stop spoiling the show, by inherently asking. For instance, we put up a thread every week for Sacred Symbols, but that's just a thread where it's like, what do you want to talk about for Sacred Symbols this week? But I write the show without those notes, and then I look at it afterwards and try to fit all of them into the show. This is a little different. It's the same thing, but you have to let people know the specific topics. You can't just solicit a general, what do you want to talk about kind of thing.
Yeah. So no, that makes sense.
Indeed. So go on.
That's a nice perk. That's a nice upside.
I think so too. Yeah. Hit me with a dad joke, for God's sake.
All right. This comes from our friend Saul Nolasco. He just sent me this morning, actually, so it's fresh in my mind. I said, I'm going to use this today, Saul. Kyle, what did the sushi say to the bee?
I don't know.
Wasabi.
It's pretty good.
Why not?
Yeah, that's fine.
We'll kick off 2023 with that one, for good or for bad.
By the way, I don't think I sent you, I might have sent you this image, but I didn't. It's not a dad joke, but it's just something that I think you would think was funny. It's like a cartoon, like a single frame cartoon or whatever, single cell cartoon. And it's these two aliens with like a UFO behind them, very cartoonish, like a UFO behind them. And they're in front of a crucifix. And the camera's from behind it. And it just says on the bottom, I think we should get the hell out of here. That's what I think. And I think I was like, that is so awesome. Like, that's like the first thing they encounter is us like nailing some dude to a cross. I'll have to send you that.
Ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is that new? Is that a new cartoon, or is
I don't know.
old?
It's like, I don't know if it's new or not, but it looks like one of those, just general cartoons that are.
Yeah. It's like ageless.
Right.
Because that's such a great idea, like an obvious idea. I'd be surprised if no one thought of that yet.
Yeah, it's hysterical. It's just like that. It's just the two aliens, like, you know, the big eyes or whatever, and the spaceship behind them. And they're just like, we got to get the hell out of here.
I wouldn't blame them.
No, I think you should get the hell out of here. And we're going to get the hell out of here.
Yes, sir.
We'll see you in 2 weeks for more Knockback, and we'll see you next week for Constellation. Please do subscribe to both if you don't already. Leave us nice reviews on podcast services. Support us on Patreon, patreon.com/laststandmedia for early ad-free access, and of course, merch at laststandmedia.store. And we'll see you suckers next time, and in February in Houston as well. Looking forward to it. Until then, my friends, we'll see you next time. Goodbye. Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. Knockback's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Knockback, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.